Good morning, everyone. I'm Isabel. I have a little feedback here. Good morning, everyone. I'm Isabel Montañez, Chair of the Board of Earth Sciences and Resources. Thank you all for attending today's meeting. Today, we're talking about an incredibly important topic that is promoting diversity in the geosciences, a field that has not seen much change in racial diversity over the past 40 years. As geoscientists, we are stewards of the Earth, and our science provides the foundation and the path forward to addressing many important issues, from resource exploration to natural hazards to climate change. And the best solutions to these issues require diverse perspectives. Thus, if we cannot recruit and retain diverse talent, then we simply cannot find the best solutions. Our speakers and panelists have generously agreed to share their experience in both formal programs and in their own career pathways as a guide to more deeply exploring how best to recruit, develop, and nurture the diverse talent that is so critical to our thriving Earth in the future. So after I give a brief overview of the agenda and introductions from our board members and staff, we will be hearing from our three keynote presenters. First, Dr. Chris Keene and Dr. Susan Sullivan will be presenting on measuring trends for underrepresented minorities in the earth science and professional society responses. That will be followed by Dr. Brandon Jones from the National Science Foundation, who will be discussing science does not conduct itself, so who's conducting? And after each presentation, there will be time for 1 to 2 follow-up questions from the board and the audience, and then followed by a discussion among the panelists. We'll take a brief break, after which Brandon will join us again, and now is the moderator of our panel on pathways and values, challenges and opportunities in neuroscience. We're very excited for an excellent set of panelists: Dr. Isaac Crumbly, Ms. Rhea Graham, Dr. Vernon Morris, PhD students, Stephanie Suarez, Dr. Crystal Tully Cordova, and Dean Joshua Villalobos. Brandon will begin the panel discussion by asking the panelists some questions of his choosing. And then after about 30 minutes, we will open questions to the board and to the audience for additional questions. I'm going to ask that the board members please use your virtual hand, your blue hand in the extras or at the bottom of your screen. Sorry, I cannot see mine. Elizabeth will be helping me to monitor those virtual hands, and we'll be sure to get questions from you. Audience members, there is a Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. Please write your questions there. These will be then monitored by the staff, and we'll be passing those questions on to whoever at that moment is the moderator for this, me, and then later Brandon. We'd like you to know that this webinar is being recorded, so any questions that you submit could be read aloud and included in our recording. And a link to that recording, as well as a copy of the slides, will be posted on our website. So before we start, we would like to introduce to you our BESR board members and the staff to the panelists. Please let the panelists. So please let the panelists know your name and affiliation. I'm going to call on each of our board members and staff in succession. So I'll start. I'm Isabel Montañez. I'm a distinguished professor of geosciences at the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences at the University of California, Davis. Estella, can I call on you next, please?
Hi, happy to have all our panelists joining us today this afternoon. My name is Estella Atekwana, and I am the Dean of the College of Earth, Ocean, and Environment at the University of Delaware.
Thank you. Thorsten. I apologize, I can't see all 142 images. I'm not sure, maybe Thorsten hasn't joined us yet. We'll come back. Brenda? Scott.
Hi, I'm Scott Cameron. I'm a geologist. I currently serve on BESR. I'm a consultant now for the last 7 years. Formerly, I was with Shell Oil for 32 years. Really looking forward to our panelists today. Thank you so much.
Elia?
Good morning. My name is Nelia Dunbar, and I'm the director of the New Mexico Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources, and as such, I'm the state geologist of New Mexico, and I'm really happy and excited to be here today.
Rod?
Unmute Rod.
I'm sorry. Good morning. I'm Rod Ewing. I'm a professor of geological sciences and co-director of the Center for International Security at Stanford University.
Thank you. So, okay, I can see that I can see who's on from the panel, from the board. So Thorsten, can I get you back? You're muted.
Yes, sorry about that. I'm Thorsten
Thank you.
Becker at the University of Texas. I'm the chair of COSEC and a member of BESR, and I regrettably have to drop in and out of this meeting, so my apologies for that.
That's right, we're pleased to have you. Okay, Bill Hammond.
Hello, I'm Bill Hammond. I'm a professor at the University of Nevada, Reno, and I'm on the Board of Earth Sciences and Resources, and I'm very happy to be here, and I thank the panelists for coming.
Thank you. Carol Harden.
I'm Carol Harden. I'm a professor emerita of geography from the University of Tennessee. I'm a geomorphologist, and I chair the Geographical Sciences Committee at the National Academies.
Thank you. Bob Kleinberg.
Good day. I'm Robert Kleinberg. I'm a senior research scholar at the Columbia University Center on Global Energy Policy and senior fellow at Boston University Institute for Sustainable Energy. I'm a member of the National Academy of Engineering. I spent most of my career developing technology for the fossil fuel industry.
Bob, I think we lost you there for a minute, but thank you. Okay, Michael, are you? Yes, Michael.
Good morning. I'm Michael Manga. I'm a professor in and chair of the Department of Earth and Planetary Science at the University of California, Berkeley. And I thank all the panelists for engaging with us today.
Thank you. Marty McCann.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Marty McCann. I'm a civil engineer and I chair the Committee of Geotechnical and Geologic Engineering, which is a standing committee under BESR. And I'm an adjunct professor at Stanford and a engineering consultant. And thanks everyone for joining today.
Thank you. Jeff Rubin.
Morning, Jeff Rubin. I'm a semi-retired emergency manager and geologist in Oregon. Really excited to see our members, panelists, and all the attendees today.
Thank you. And I'm not sure if some people could be on by phone, in which case I may not have them on the list. So I'm going to call, is Jim Slutz with us? All right, we'll see if maybe he comes on later. Xiaowan Wang.
Good morning, Bill. Greetings, everyone. I'm Xiaowen Wang, a professor and the head of the Department of Geography and Geographic Information Science at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I'm also directing UIUC's CyberGS Center for Advanced Digital and Spatial Studies. So this is a very important and critical topic. This panel is going to be addressing. Many thanks to the panelists and the board putting together this very interesting event.
Thank you. Brenda, I think you're Brenda Bowen.
Yep, I'm here. Thanks. Hello, everyone. I'm Brenda Bowen. I'm a professor of geology and geophysics at the University of Utah and director of the university's Global Change and Sustainability Center. And happy to see you all here.
Thank you. And I am quickly looking to see who I've missed from our board. If I have, please feel free to turn on your camera.
Elizabeth Wilson.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
I didn't see you on the list here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having this wonderful panel. I'm really looking forward to it. And thank you, panelists, for really engaging with us on this really important topic. I'm at Dartmouth College and the director of the Arthur Irving Institute for Energy and Society and a professor in the Environmental Studies Department.
Thank you, Elizabeth. You had not been at the bottom of the list, and I'm sorry I missed you there. Okay, we have a wonderful staff who really has made many things possible for this board, in particular, who are fully behind how this meeting has been pulled together and how it will be going. So I want to make sure we give a big shout out to them and introduce you. First, we should start with Eric. I know you probably can't speak, but Eric Edkin has made the Zoom meeting possible with all of its various components. So, but all right. And then Elizabeth, are you on that you could speak? Yeah, I think maybe we're just going to say hi to our staff. Deb Glipson, who is now the interim acting director, or the acting deck director for the board, who has clearly been put in much of the footwork behind this event today. And Lynn, also a director a study director at the Academy. Samantha Maxino, I'm sure I pronounced that incorrectly, I'm sorry. Another study director. Courtney Devane, who is the staff support for this board, BESR. Eric, as I mentioned, Eric Edkin. Eleni Georges, also a staff member with the board. So I think we're ready to start our meeting, and the very exciting program that has been pulled together for today. And we'll start with our 3 keynote speakers. First, we'll hear from Chris Keene and Susan Sullivan. And just so everyone knows what the protocol is for the day, the speakers each have 20 minutes for their presentation. I'm keeping my eye closely on the time, and so I'm sure we'll have time for at least a couple of questions and perhaps more if we can squeeze those in. All right, can I turn the screen over to Chris and Susan?
Thank you very much. You can enable so I can share my screen, please. There we go.
Are you good?
That should do it. Hopefully everyone sees the slides now.
Yes,
so great. So it's a great opportunity to talk to the board about measuring diversity in the geoscience. And I'm with the American Geosciences Institute, and I want to also acknowledge my colleague Lila Gonzalez, who helped with the data. So we'll talk about some of the measuring of the geoscience, and Susan Sullivan's going to talk about what the societies are doing to address this issue immediately following. So first thing, this is very fresh data. Taking a look at the underrepresented minority population within the geoscience workforce, that's the yellow line that you see. One of the key things, just as a caveat, these are numbers. This is basically the 100% minus, as they would call it, majority population in the workforce, because there's some flex and overlap within the underrepresented minority counting. So this would be the sort of the pure number. And I think, as you can see, traditionally we recognize that the geosciences have been the worst, unfortunately, in STEM for diversity. But over the last couple of years, we've seen an equaling out with the rest of the STEM fields. And we'll talk a little bit about why that's probably occurring. And just on all these graphs, just so you see, the black line is the total underrepresented population within the total US workforce. So sort of, I guess, technically the goal. If we take a look at a couple of the subsections, so if we look at Black and African American, you can see that this is a population we have a very serious problem with. And unlike the other STEM fields, we have this cyclicity that's going on. And we've been trying to identify what the drivers are. And one of the things that we think is at play is that there is, because of the way these numbers are counted, that unfortunately we probably have a very low baseline of African American individuals in the geosciences, but what we have are African immigrants who are coming. The oil industry certainly has a fair number that come for a couple years. and go back into country later, and they do get counted as Black a lot of times. And we think that may be part of this cyclicity. So teasing out some of that is going to be an important issue for us in the future. But if we look at the Hispanic and Latino category, you can see that most of STEM has just been steadily increasing, and we were trailing for a long time, but we've seen a lot of strong growth over the last 8 to 10 years, particularly in the last couple of years. So, it's interesting. One of the things we want to look at is our programs like GeoForce. Are these really starting to have long-term structural impact? I know there's been a number of programs, or are there some other drivers that is bringing us into this more positive situation that we are a long ways from being, I think, where we want to be. And then if we look at the graduation, the degrees granted, so this is undergraduates, bachelor's degrees granted, you can see again, the growth for underrepresented minority and degrees is in the Hispanic space. Unfortunately, the other categories really are not seeing much growth or change over this time. I'm not going to show the graduate data, which is mostly in the low single digits, unfortunately, for all of STEM. I just want to bring attention to it for the board that the Council of Graduate Schools will be having a report, should be coming out in the next month, about the new graduate students and what's going on. And there's a very extensive analysis on diversity. It's concerning, but I think it's best that's the most comprehensive and accurate look. But we are sharing all the same issues with the rest of STEM, though. And I just want to bring up, one of the areas that we see when we're looking at the demographics is the issue of first-generation college students as a potential, population that we need to be engaging in order to address diversity. And I think the biggest concern I have is we, as a discipline, are the bottom of the barrel in engaging these first-generation students. Only 8% of our students are first-generation, and this includes geoscience students that are in community colleges. So that's a serious challenge, but also a big opportunity, because over 50% of first-generation college students come from underrepresented minority populations. But again, one of the big challenges is that they have not the best throughput to the degree. There are structural supports and other activities that are required. But I think in those challenges represents opportunities for us to address these issues. And then finally, just to provide some context on data, is I'll be blunt, the diversity metrics in the US they're somewhat misleading. Compared to other countries, we have our numbers are a convolution of race and ethnicity. They can overlap, they can double count, they can undercount. And perhaps the biggest problem is we only are affirmative in our identification of race and ethnicity if a person is a minority. So if they're willing to actually identify that, because if someone omits, then they're immediately classified as white by default. And I think this is a real challenge for us. And additionally, I think we've all seen this at times, and I think it's unfortunate. A lot of times folks try to use this data as a socioeconomic proxy, but the world is a much more complex and interesting place than that. And so I think as we move forward, looking at how we use this data, making sure that we're capturing what we want. I think it's doubtful that the US could actually move to an affirmative identity process like the UK and Ireland have, for instance. The sense of independence, I don't need to answer if I don't have to. But I think the other side is as a melting pot, multiracial is a big challenge from a demographic measurement standpoint, but it's actually very reflective of what we're seeing. But also that some of the literature is now showing cases of what I would say is identity fluidity by individuals. So it's not a real hard parameter, perhaps as most people think. And so anytime that we're looking at diversity processes in our data, one of the things that we try to ask, are our goals actually measurable? And I think any project that's moving forward, we need to be asking that. If we have sort of this fuzzy area around sort of the general data sets. And the other question is, can we actually create an accurate and precise evaluative metric on making progress based on these projects. And if you can overwhelm the system and see growth above sort of the error bars, then perhaps you have it. But I think we all intrinsically understand the goal we're trying for in improving our situation in the geosciences. But again, coming down to the actual metrics is going to be, needs to be part of that conversation. So that's just a quick overview. We are releasing a geoscience currents, much more comprehensive on diversity today or tomorrow, through the AGI website. So, please feel free to access that, and be happy to answer questions on that when it comes out. So I'm going to turn this over to Susan Sullivan about professional society responses.
Great, thank you, Chris. Hi, everybody. I'm glad you're here today. I'm Susan Sullivan. I'm Director of Diversity and Inclusion at CERES at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I'm also a member of the Board of Directors at AGI. When the panelists speak, you'll hear, I'm sure, some of the ways that professional societies have supported or included or welcomed our panelists as part of their journey into the discipline and through the discipline. It's obvious that professional societies have a role and have a responsibility in addressing and improving the numbers that Chris showed you just a moment ago. So next slide, please, Chris. Thank you. There have been at least two well-known calls for action in the geosciences. One of them is No Time for Silence. Vernon Morris, who's one of your panelists, is one of the primary authors of that call. Another is on change.org. It's a call for a robust anti-racism plan in the geosciences. And both of those calls outline a broad and comprehensive set of actions that professional societies can take in order to address the need to improve the racial and ethnic diversity of geoscientists. And so AGI, you may or may not know, is a federation of member societies. So we have 50 plus member societies and associated societies. They range from very large professional societies like AGU, GSA, American Meteorological Society, to smaller societies, some of which are run entirely by volunteer effort. Some of our societies have diversity and inclusion as part of their charter and their DNA. That includes National Association for Black Geoscientists, IAGD, Association for Women Geoscientists, and others are just getting started in building their expertise and their capacity for addressing racial and ethnic equity. As part of the AGI response, we've been drafting a framework to help our member societies work together on improving racial and ethnic equity. Member representatives from all of the societies that you see listed here were part of drafting that. And that's going up for discussion at our member society meeting next week. One of the primary mechanisms that we have as part of that framework is to establish a pan-society working group or committee where we can learn from each other as we all try to move forward. And then as part of that, we surveyed the AGI member societies to see where are they now, what has already been done, whether it's been done in the last few years or in the last few months, and what are societies planning to do now. So that was a qualitative survey. I'll show you the results. You'll see some charts. It's not really quantitative, it's qualitative. This is what societies had as top of mind of what they've already done and what they plan to do. So I'll show you that to show where the societies are now. So what kind of actions did the societies do? Chris, next slide, please. For context, I'll give you the actions called for in the No Time for Silence call for action. And these are the specific recommendations and calls for professional societies. The first three of these actions have to do with a comprehensive look at all of our activity. Societies have meetings, publications, awards, leadership, governance, There's education for members. They set expectations for members. It really crosses a wide gamut of activities that's influential in our discipline. So the first call is to develop robust and meaningful strategic plans, but it's not enough to have a plan that sits on a shelf. Those plans need to be implemented with all the resources, which includes not only money, but capacity, expertise, and leadership will, leadership sponsorship. And then track the progress against traceable metrics, which are transparently communicated so that the community can hold societies accountable to their plans. We know that who is at the top of societies makes a difference to those activities. So there's a call to diversify the leadership and the staff of professional societies with scientists drawn from underrepresented groups. And then the last two actions have to do with how we recognize work in professional societies and in our disciplines. So examining, improving, diversifying the selection processes, the ways in which we recognize work through invited speakers, invited papers, and awards and honors. And there's a lot more. I urge you to go look at both of those calls and see the breadth of suggested and recommended called for actions, and use that as part of the context for what you'll see next. So, I mean, look at after the next two slides, don't look at it right now, but this will give you some context for what you're seeing here. So thank you, Chris, for that slide. So what has your society already done? We had close to 50% response rate from our member societies saying what they have already done. And anybody who's been watching this space, who's been understanding what's going on over the last few months, will not be surprised to see that for the highest action that people have taken, or the most frequent action that societies have taken, is to establish a committee and start having some conversations and drawing on the expertise of their membership to figure out what they're going to do. Societies have done member education, which can mean webinars, it can mean member resource areas, just trying to bring their members up to speed on what we're talking about here and why it's a mission imperative for the health of our discipline. You also won't be surprised to see that there have been a number of public-facing statements, which range from public statements that went out or are put on websites, to education that has to do with highlighting the contributions of underrepresented scientists. A lot of societies have done strategic planning of the sort that's been called for. There's a lot of direct support for BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, underrepresented minorities in geosciences. Oftentimes that takes the form of scholarships or travel sponsorship, mentoring programs, affinity groups. The Paleo Society has a new program where they are funding members to attend the SOCNAS meeting, the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos, Hispanics, Native Americans in Science. One exciting development is that a lot of societies are starting to look at their leadership. How do people become leaders? What training and education does leadership need in order to be skilled in this area? Societies have expanded their board of directors to bring in more underrepresented voices. So a whole suite of activities around here. And then people have started to look at their actual parts of their programs, top to bottom review of their programs and ways of doing business, which is part of strategic planning, reviewing their awards and honors, their publications, who gets to be an author, who is a reviewer, how are people supported to be reviewers in that uncompensated service activity. And how are associate editors and editors-in-chief chosen for our publications? So this is what societies have already done. As I mentioned, some societies have been in this area working on this for years. Some societies have a new sense of urgency and a new sense of energy around racial and ethnic equity. So next slide, Chris. Now, what are societies planning next? Again, this is top of mind. This is what people had as, this is our top thing right now that we're working on. Fewer people talking about strategic planning. A lot of societies have already done that, and or feel that they're already well on their way. A lot more programming around the kind of support that I referenced earlier, fundraising for scholarships, travel support, mentoring, and other supports, and more review around awards and honors. One thing to note is that the public facing activity is now at the end of the list. People have already done their big push on public facing, and I think it's a positive thing that their attention is turning more to internally, how do they support their members and how do they improve their business practices and their policies. So with that, next slide, Chris. So with that, what I'm drawing from this data so far and what we're hearing from our member societies is that societies have heard the calls for action and they're starting to take that action. Urgency has very much increased. I think there's been a sea change in an understanding that that racial and ethnic equity is, as I mentioned before, a mission imperative that is critical to the health of our discipline, the health of our mission, and the well-being of the people who have chosen to be in our discipline. It's not just about our mission, it's about the well-being of the people who are in our discipline. And also a recognition that there's a long way to go. I'm very pleased to see the improvement in the data that Chris showed, but clearly we have a long way to go to make sure that we can maintain that momentum and do better. So with that, I'll end and turn it back over.
Thank you, Chris and Susan, for wonderful presentations. We will be taking a couple of questions, and we're going to start with the board. I'm going to actually be watching for the hands, and so if you please use your blue hand if you have a question. So while those questions are being considered by the board, I'm going to ask a couple of quick ones from our audience because I think they're pretty sort of just a clarification. Angel Garcia asks, how do you count participation of individuals that have intersection of identities, Hispanic ethnicity, but Black as a race?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. That's actually where, from a demographic standpoint, this is difficult. So they're both counted. And that's why, in our master first slide, that really actually is the whole population minus the majority populations, because that accommodates for folks that are, Hispanic and Black. You do have Hispanic Caucasian as well, pop up periodically, which some of that will be consumed, but it is a big challenge, and that is because we do conflate ethnicity and race in the U.S. It doesn't make the actual counting a challenge, and that's, I think, one of my reasons we need to think about what our metrics are for success. Exactly.
Great. Okay, Nelia, I think I saw your hand next.
Yes, I have a question for Dr. Sullivan. I think something that people think about a lot is the pipeline issue. And I'm curious what the professional societies, if that was part of the conversation with professional societies, and what insight you might have to offer there.
Well, I expect we're going to have a lot more conversation about this. As I mentioned, the framework will be up for discussion at our member society meeting, which is one of our first opportunities to have federation-wide discussion. Say there's been a great deal of investment in pre-college and undergraduate level participation by underrepresented groups in geosciences. And we can see some of that in some of the numbers that Chris showed. I know that on my campus, we're not doing badly at recruiting underrepresented minority groups. Where we're failing is in retaining people within our university. And so I expect that is a problem in a lot of places of our discipline. And so in my own practice for series, I'm focused first on our culture and our retention of people who are in our discipline. And rather than recruiting more people, I think of it in some ways as a garden where we have to be a place where people can thrive and work on the underlying garden where we want people to succeed before we put at the same time that we're attracting and welcoming people to come to our workplace.
Thank you. Vernon Morris?
Thanks. Oh, okay, I can start my video as well, sorry. Actually, my question feeds into what was just stated pretty nicely. I think retention, I'm wondering if retention was part of the cyclic nature that Chris was seeing in some of his graphs. I know certainly, and I agree with Susan, that retention is a major challenge. And so it sort of speaks to the pipeline concept, which I don't actually support that there is a pipeline, because it suggests that there's a well-defined source that you're tapping. And it also assumes that there's a well-defined conduit. And I don't believe, either anecdotally, experientially, or observationally, that those are what we see in the geosciences right now. There are many pathways, and all of them are fraught with barriers and challenges. And so the retention is a thing. So I wondered if, my question, sorry for that lead in, but is, have you considered retention as being part of the reason for that cyclic nature in those graphs? Because with low numbers, if you have significant retention, that's exactly what you would see. And you see it in both the Hispanic, you see the cyclic nature in both the Hispanic and the African-American numbers. And so just some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so, until the last couple of years, I agree. We saw with economic downturns, we saw basically, we think, a retention issue. When we remap it against the price of oil, we're seeing a little bit, something a little bit different right now. But I think, I'll just, in the geoscience currents that we're just about to release, one of the things, and this is a big concern, I think it's getting to your point, is in the last 3 years, we've seen a drop of from student to workforce in underrepresented populations drop by about 50%. We've seen something has gone wrong in, if it's a pipeline, it's a very leaky one at that interface, let alone, within the degree program. So the retention at all points, I think, is a very, very large issue. It's really hard to measure when someone leaves and why, because they leave, they're gone, and it's hard to track them back down. So I think this is an area that we all have to look at, and I think the society should be a place that hopefully can keep a tabs on folks at least long enough to figure out what the challenges are that they're facing.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. So Estella?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for taking my question. And this is for Chris. It's really encouraging to see the increase in the percentage of the Hispanic participation in the geosciences. I'm wondering, is it because of something we are doing right, or is it due to just the increase in the population? Can you tell the difference?
This is our big question right now that we want to go explore, because you do have the overall increase in Hispanic attendance in university, so that could be a driver. We also do have some very large-scale programs that kicked in at about 10 years ago to support the development of increased Hispanic participation in geoscience. So we haven't been able to divine that yet, but that is actually one of our near-term goals as we continue surveying, is to go look exactly at that issue. So fortunately, I don't have an answer, but we agree it's a key question that we need to unravel.
Okay, thank you. I think we probably should move on. Thank you again to both of our speakers. So I'd like to move on now to Brandon, who will also be giving a keynote talk for the next about 20 minutes, and then we'll follow with questions, a few questions. Brandon.
Thank you, Isabel. And I'm going to start my timer as well as start my presentation. So if someone can let me know.
You can see your screen.
Would you like a 3-minute?
Is that
heads up?
Sure, that's fine. Okay. Okay, and the first slide showing?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So thank you to all for organizing the meeting, for the invitation. Thank you to Chris and Susan for a great kickoff presentation with some great data and already some great discussion from the participants and the panelists. But I'm going to move through these slides and kind of talk at a very high level about this issue related to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in the geosciences, and mainly, of course, for this board, Earth Sciences. And the title of the talk is there. You heard Isabel mention it. It's in the agenda. Science does not conduct itself, so who's conducting? And if this was a science talk, I would have a list of publications and references. But since this really isn't science-y, I should say, I have some recent books that I've read that help inform the discussion that I'd like to be a part of and like to provide input to, as well as the scholarship that has been generated around this issue. And so you see those books on that first slide. And by way of background, technically, my background is marine science, larval ecology with some physical oceanography. Currently, I'm at the National Science Foundation in the Directorate for Geosciences in the front office, and I manage education, workforce development, and broadening participation programs there for Geo. So lots of acronyms have already been thrown around, which has been great. JEDI is one of the new acronyms that approaches in a more holistic way this issue of equity, inclusion, and diversity. And it's easy, especially for science types, an easy acronym to remember for obvious reasons. So justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. When you're talking about justice, you're talking about removing barriers for all people to be liberated wherever they are and whatever they're doing. When you're talking about equity, you're talking about providing access to the resources that people need to thrive. Diversity, of course, has been the catch-all term, and it's been misused over the decades. But diversity is valuing all differences equally, and not providing some level of valuation depending on who you are or where you're coming from, but relying on your perspective as equal. And of course, inclusion is about belonging, and individuals having that sense of belonging, so that, as you heard Susan mention, so that they can thrive wherever they happen to be, in this case, in the geosciences. So the first take-home message are these 3 points here. The STEM workforce cannot operate at full capacity if all available qualified minds are not engaged. Individuals who are in the workforce cannot operate at full capacity if they are stressed. Just like any organism in any environment, there's an optimal zone where they can operate, where the physical factors and their biological factors or what have you are all in harmony. And it's the same for humans. And our planet, number 3, is facing all hands on deck problems, but all hands are not on deck. And we are going to have to deal with this issue. And this is why we're here today having this meeting. And as you heard, professional societies and academic departments, et cetera, are looking at really what can be done to retain. It's not about the the best, because if the environment is conducive for individuals to bring their best, then that's what you're going to get. And we have too many societal issues, many of them environmental, that we need all minds and all levels of energy to address these. We just simply can't afford it as a species on the planet not to. So kind of take home 1A, individuals are not able to bring all of themselves to the research enterprise. And so there's this reciprocity. They're not able, for whatever reason, to bring 100% or conduct their research or their learning or their education on all cylinders. And what that does is, obviously they're hampered, but then it hampers the research enterprise itself. So we have to make sure that there's balance in this so that there's a win-win. And the geosciences would operate, one could argue, in the top 3 spheres and the one at the right in the bottom middle. So the cryosphere, atmosphere, hydrosphere, and the lithosphere. All geoscientists also, and in other disciplines, also operate in the anthrosphere, because this is the human dimension of R&D, research and development. This is the development side, and not technical transfer for some good or product from the science, but the development of individuals all through their career stages, not just from the early part of the pathway, but as they transition, the early career faculty transitioning to tenured, then maybe transitioning to a chair or a dean. I mean, so these are the things that we need to think about systems-wide, and that's just in academia. That's not even in the federal government or the private sector or not-for-profit, et cetera. So here's a famous figure from the very successful musical Hamilton. Many of you have seen that, and there's one great scene with a great song where they talk about immigrants, we get the job done. And so this is a very American Western idea that if you're an immigrant and you come from another country, and you heard Chris talk about this, how there's difficulty in measuring African Americans versus African people from African countries who come here as immigrants. And this American notion of rugged individualism, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, grit, determination, do it yourself, et cetera, that might have worked, and it continues to work for immigrants. But it doesn't necessarily work for groups who weren't immigrants. So as you heard Susan say, this acronym BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color, when you're talking about Native Americans, Puerto Ricans, Native Hawaiians, Mexicans, they were all here on this land. And this is we're talking about a US specific issue here. They were original, so they weren't immigrants. And then you add in the millions of bodies from Africa, from the continent of Africa, who were forced here. They weren't immigrants. So these are groups of people who have been, and now we have the descendants of those who have been involuntarily incorporated into the US. They were never meant to be a part of this country. And so then it just so happens, as you heard Susan and Chris present, that it's the descendants of these groups that we're still having an issue with in science, in this case, geoscience. Everyone, well, I would say everyone, most people have seen this paper that came out a couple of years ago by Bernard and Cooper using NSF data, mainly looking at PhDs in academia. And to a question that came up earlier, there's been, and this is 40 years, and really one could argue at least in the last 50 years, there has been quite a bit of upfront work at the beginning of the pathway, K through 12, teacher prep, undergraduates, to bring in more diverse individuals. So it's been about increasing numbers. So we have a half century's worth of funding and work, and we're still not making progress. So as good scientists, when do we step back and say, let's look at the entire system instead of continuing to focus on the front part and these individuals? Something, and we just heard it, something's going on that's impacting retention. And so again, I'll reemphasize, as good scientists, when are we going to step back and apply appropriate scientific principles to this issue. If we have the assumptions of this American rugged individualism, and we're moving, that has seeped into all sectors, including science, and we're moving into attempting to support individuals, we have to check our assumptions. We do it all the time with our statistical analysis. Assumptions related to who conducts geoscience research. So for instance, in this book, The Loudest Duck, the author talks about, draws a comparison between the concept of the squeaky wheel gets the grease. We've heard that, or gets the oil, or what have you. So it's this idea of in Western society, you speak up and people know you're there and they know what you need, and then they give you what it is you desire. The author draws out a comparison in China that the loudest duck, which is the analog to the squeaky wheel, doesn't get supported. Actually, the loudest duck gets shot. So if you don't have an understanding of the cultural pieces that make up an individual as they're coming in to be your collaborator or your student or what have you, then you might be trying to force a round peg in a square hole. And then when they don't fit, we maybe have shaken our finger at, well, they didn't have what it took to make it. Instead of really looking at, well, maybe we should round out our whole so individuals can bring all of themselves to the enterprise. So that's who's conducting. There's assumptions about where geoscience research is conducted. And if you're really serious about this, then you're going to run into some very uncomfortable information that really is a duh moment. And so you look at this article from the Public Land and Resources Law Review, the ethnic cleansing in America's creation of the national parks, excuse me. Well, of course, that's what happened. And so as you read this article, and even if you dig into the further research, it's, what were the political and what was the mindset of the individuals, mainly in this instance was John Muir and President Teddy Roosevelt, to push this idea of an uninhabited wilderness in order to create the national park system. And how did that idea override previous ideas of other individuals who wanted to incorporate the native and indigenous and original peoples of the land in the creation of the national park system? Why is it that the uninhabited version is the one that won out? So if we have these assumptions and we want to, without acknowledging them, we call that inherent bias or unconscious bias, and we go to create programs and activities or develop new things to do in our departments, et cetera. What we do is we could end up making a mess if we don't adjust to or recognize those assumptions and do something about them. And so back to the data in this paper, there was a recognition, and you heard Susan say this, over time, there was a lot of work put into diversity, meaning let's bring in more individuals that are different, which was a great effort. There was a recognition that that needed to be done. And so it was all about increasing numbers. We just need more people from this group and more people from that group and more women, et cetera. And so we designed a lot of our activities, our programs, our RU programs. And when we were perhaps hiring for jobs in the federal government or early career faculty, we advertised our institutions, our departments, the REU experience as this is going to be the greatest thing ever if you just come here, and so on. But the experience of the individual did not meet or did not align with what was advertised as far as what they possibly could have experienced. And so we went back to, okay, what do we need to do about getting these individuals more prepared or better as they're moving in, or do we recruit elsewhere? Again, on that front end of things versus looking at possibly the program, the department, the institution, or as you heard earlier, the culture that these individuals are being brought into. Why would I continue to go to the pet store and buy goldfish, and every time I bring the goldfish home, they're healthy at the pet store, but when I bring them home, they get sick. And I want to blame the pet store, I want to blame the source of the fish, versus looking at, oh, maybe something's wrong with my water and I need to adjust my water in my house. And so that's where we are now when we're talking about dealing with the environment for retention, and inclusion, so all individuals can thrive and all who are qualified and want to can conduct scientific research, because we need those minds. These issues I'm bringing up are sociological problems. They're not research issues. In other words, they're not geoscience, technical research issues. They're social problems. And Gus Speth, who's an environmental lawyer, this famous quote from him, he's been an environmental activist, you could say, for some time. And I'll read it for those on the phone. I used to think the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that 30 years of good science could address these problems. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. Now, cultural and spiritual people may recoil. We're not preaching to people or anything of that nature. But what we're talking about is geoscientists and other disciplines. That's not part of our training as we're moving through our preparation. So we need to make sure that we have, if we're serious about this JEDI work, we need to make sure we have the individuals who are experts in humans to help us out with this. So culture change isn't simply a business initiative, it's a social initiative. And so if 80% of what we learn is done socially, if you're out in the field with other people, if you're on the ship with other people, if you're down on the ice conducting research with other people, there's that social part. And as students are socialized into academia, there are things that need to be measured in order to ensure that the retention mechanisms are performing as they should. And so therefore we need social and behavioral scientists to be part of this conversation as we have here today. And in that vein, there's a program that the Geosciences Directorate at NSF is now supporting, originally called GOLD, now called Golden, EN program for, it's Geoscience Opportunities for Leadership and Diversity, Expanding the Network. And it's all about identifying diversity champions at the professional level. So we're not looking at the front end of the pathway, we're looking at who the faculty are, who are the program directors, if there are interns coming in, who are those individuals that are serious about the mentoring, about creating inclusive and inviting environments, and how do we replicate what those individuals have or what those teams have, and provide training or information or curriculum or materials for others in all sectors to capitalize on this so that they can begin to change the environment so individuals can thrive. So moving into the last set of slides, these are just some recommendations to address this. Really, it's an issue of value that's been placed on humans who are conducting science. One, intersectionality, already been touched on. Chris did an awesome job. Angel brought up that question, and that's something you really have to consider, because people are bringing all sets of identities with them. Everyone does. And it's not fair to ask someone to leave something outside of their profession, so because that already hinders them from being 100% of who they are and 100% of bringing their ideas and perspectives to the science enterprise. Isolation and isolated locations, ecological sciences, archaeology, geoscience, there are issues with where research is conducted. That's just where it is, that doesn't change, but it has to be considered how individuals may feel and what can be done so that they feel comfortable out in the field, on the ship, on the ice. Critical self-reflection by white colleagues, administrators, a lot of scholarship in this area, particularly in the geosciences. I would point you to this recent volume of the Journal of Geoscience Education for further follow-up. Recognition that bias impacts recruitment, hiring, awards, tenure, and promotion. that has to be addressed for individuals to make sure they get the credit for what they're doing as they're moving through the system. Mentoring, support, assistance, and allyship is key. We're going to be talking about this in the panel. And let underrepresented scholars tell their own stories and have their own spaces. That is key to them feeling a sense of inclusion, which is that belonging piece. Final slide, develop cross-racial relationships, develop racial stamina, just be human. And it's okay to be quiet and just listen. We, again, will be touching on many of these things in the panel discussion later on. I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brandon. A wonderful presentation, very thought-provoking. We have time for several questions, actually, and I had to cut off the board earlier, so I'd like to start with a couple of questions from the board. And while those questions are coming in, I'm going to ask you one, Brandon, from the audience. How can universities with predominantly Caucasian faculty attract and retain more diverse student populations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there's going to have to be some intentionality about it. The days of checking boxes for just to show that there was some kind of effort, et cetera, I think those days are moving quickly along. The students that are coming in now, undergraduates, graduates, postdocs, and even our early career faculty, the generational diversity is something that's not talked about a lot in these settings, but they're not going to stand for a lot of, I'll just say it like that, a lot of what's been tolerated in the professional realm and ranks, as far as being recognized and being valued, I should say, that's a better word. And so in departments, you can look up, for instance, what NSF has supported in this program that I just mentioned, and because it's all focused on departmental culture and individuals in those departments and what they're doing. So some of the awards are looking at changing policies on what scholarship is valued for tenure and promotion. Some are focusing on trainings for holistic mentoring for individuals and not the traditional mentoring that we're used to. Because students are getting a lot of those traditional elements through social media. If they have a LinkedIn account, they don't really need you to help them expand their network. A lot of students are coming in with a lot of needs that academics in the traditional mentoring sense have not been trained for. So if we're serious about supporting them, then we're going to have to step outside of our comfort zones and do something different.
Right. Thank you. Estella.
Thank you, Brandon, for that really, truly wonderful presentation. And I was left wondering that all the things that you've said could apply to other STEM areas, not only the geosciences. So why have we seen no movement in our numbers, especially within the African-American community? Are we doing something wrong as geoscientists? Because I'm assuming that everything that you've said could apply to other STEM areas. They've made some progress, but we just haven't. Do you have any insight why?
Estella, that's a great question, and we talk about that quite a bit. And when I say we, I mean internal colleagues at NSF, and then also colleagues and friends in academia outside. And there could be lots of reasons. Again, I'll go back to what I mentioned about the founding of the country and where geosciences aligned with what was going on, 200-300 years ago in this country, as far as what is referred to as manifest destiny, expansion into the West. It was about land, it was about property, it was about mineral rights, it was about space. And not only acquiring that space, but then who was going to help work that space. And so, for instance, Steve Boss down in Arkansas has done a great series of presentations related to the Army Corps of Engineers. I think in the 1800s, as they were surveying land, they took geologists with them to map the lands and do what geologists do. But the idea was to return to those places and have a map of where the resources were and what areas were going to be profitable for this new country, et cetera. So there's this alignment with the US and how it was founded. But to your question, Estella, the ecological sciences are field sciences, and they're doing much better than we are in this area of diversity. So geo, the social scientists, that's why we've invited them to come in to start to unpack and maybe peel back some of these layers that we're unaware of as to why the Earth system sciences have not supported the original teachers and philosophers of the Earth system. And now there's a recognition we need to go back and maybe look at the 200 years worth of climate data that Native Alaskans could provide for us to help us understand even better climate change and things of that nature. So I don't have a straight answer because that's one of the questions we're attempting to get at.
Great. If you don't mind, Brandon, I'm going to ask Chris and Susan to join us as well for a couple of final questions. Scott, you have had your hand up for a while from both talks.
Yeah, thank you. This is really a question probably for really all three of you. A lot of the focus of our discussion so far, and probably rightly so, has been more on looking at numbers and experiences from the academy, if you will. But and I noticed, Brandon, you've had experience, of course, in government service, and I'm just wondering if any of the trends that we're seeing do we see any difference between other essentially workforce sectors, for instance, government service or the private sector? Are there any things there that are materially different and potentially learning opportunities, either positively or negatively, relatively to improving the trends we've seen?
I think, from the data side, when we've looked at it, we've seen it with gender, and we do see it with the whole workforce numbers for geoscience. In general, the private sector seems to do much better than academia. I think the nature of that pathway in academia as a career, as an industry in its own right, is fraught with a lot of additional challenges. And so unfortunately academia lags, and that's, I think, a big barrier as well for catalyzing additional for the students to propel through the system. I think it has a lot to do with the internal structure of promotion and tenure and all those kinds of things within academia.
And Scott, I can add to that. I know a lot of the students that I talk with are interested in private sector or government positions, in part because of the perceived security of those positions, but also we have to recognize that academia is one of the most hierarchical cultures in existence, and that's not helping us any. Also, the apprenticeship model that we use, where your thesis advisor or your initial supervisor is a postdoc, any of those things, that relationship is highly, highly influential. In some ways, it can be good when it works, but it's also a single point failure if that's not good. So there's some lack of, I guess, redundancy when it comes to our positive supports, and some things baked into our culture that are not helping us.
Great answers. I'll chime in with two quick things. Number one, as far as the geoscience and they're related, geoscience content for the most part in the K through 12 system is absent. So as far as science. And so, students traditionally are introduced to physics, biology, and chemistry. And if they're in a well-supported or funded district, by the time they're a junior or senior in high school, they may be introduced to environmental science or something, and it's an elective. So really, by the time they go to undergrad, the geoscience options they're foreign to them. So that's one. The second point is, as it relates to BIPOC communities for geosciences, there's just a lack of awareness as to careers in science. This is what Susan and Chris were just getting at. Black community, Hispanic, et cetera, they're more familiar with computer science, engineering, medicine, and things of that nature, and could be very successful and make a good living. But for the geosciences, the awareness of making a good living in a geoscience discipline is not out there. We have to do a better job of that.
Thank you. I know that's something that Josh Villalobos spoke about in his introductory video to the panel as well. All right, I think we have time for one more question. And Brandon, this is to you, but I think that all three could certainly answer. To what extent should predominantly Caucasian organizations first work on changing their culture versus attempting to recruit or retain new minority members?
Well, Susan said it better than I could in her talk. I think that is priority one. To lean on another analogy. Susan talked about the garden, and of course I brought up the goldfish issue, but from my marine days or my research, larval ecology in the Bay, I looked at recruitment of larval forms from physical factors, bringing them in and out of Delaware Bay. And they are recruited no matter what. But if the water is hypoxic, if it's polluted, what difference does it make what levels of recruitment efforts you're involved in? If the water quality where they can't thrive, and also students take an early career, they take cues from the adults around them. And so when I say that, as Susan was talking about the hierarchy within academia and even the federal government, interns, students, et cetera, they come in, they're not only coming in for the experience, they're watching us. They're watching how we operate, how we manage, are we stressed? And they're making decisions. That's a part of the factors that go into their decision making about whether they want to stay in that career lane or not.
Excellently well put. I very much like your analogy. All right, we are just precisely on time. So I think we'll go ahead and permit us to have let's say a 17-minute break. Can we plan to reconvene on 30 minutes after the hour? Right? Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. I am now going to pass the moderating baton on to Brandon. I'm sorry, I have an echoing going on. Okay, we're good. All right, I'd like to pass the moderating baton on to Brandon. And Brandon, I will monitor hands for you, and if anything, when the questions finally come up. All right.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much. And again, thank you for the invitation. I'm really looking forward to this discussion with a high-powered, esteemed group of panelists that we have here today. And again, thanks to Chris and Susan for some great presentations in the beginning of the meeting. So we have a panel of very distinguished individuals at all career stages, some in academia, some in other sectors. They are all connected in some way to the geoscience enterprise. And I'm going to do my best to moderate this discussion. We're going to try to go maybe 30 minutes or so. I may have some flexibility depending on how the conversation goes among the panelists to go over a tiny bit. And then, as you heard from Isabel, we'll go back to fielding any questions for the panelists from first the board and then the general audience. So I'll ask all of my esteemed colleagues if they would go ahead and turn their cameras back on. And by way of introduction, because in the agenda materials that everyone has received, all the participants, there are well-detailed bios on each of the panelists. I'm only going to ask them to introduce themselves by stating their name, what their title is, and their institutional affiliation, and that's it. You can read about, again, all of them in the packet or on the website. And so that way we can get around and meet everyone, and then we'll jump right into the questions that we have. And as I mentioned, I'll do my best to try to moderate. So first, let's start with Crystal. If you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Crystal Thule Cordova, and I am a principal hydrologist with the Navajo Nation Department of Water Resources Water Management Branch.
Excellent, thank you, Crystal. Let's go over to Josh.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning. My name is Joshua Villalobos. I am an instructional dean at El Paso Community College.
Thank you, Joshua. Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Suarez. I go to the University of Houston. I am a PhD student and an NSF GFRP winner.
Excellent, congratulations. Rhea.
Hello, I'm Rhea Graham, and I'm the other bookend from Stephanie. I'm retired. I consider myself a transdisciplinary geologist, and my geology career essentially spanned the data set that Bernard and Cooper wrote about in 2018.
Excellent, thank you, Rhea. Dr. Crumley, we have to say Dr. Crumley. Others may say Ike. Please unmute yourself, sir. Dr. Crumley, you're still muted.
Okay, you can hear me now. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'm Isaac Crumley. I am Associate Vice President, and I'm the founder and director of the Cooperative Developmental Energy Program.
And your institution?
Fort Valley State University.
The Fort Valley State. Thank you so much, sir. And last but not least, my good friend, Vernon.
Thanks, Brandon. Good morning, everyone. My name is Vernon Morris. I am the director of the School for Mathematical and Natural Sciences at Arizona State University, although I was formerly at Howard University for 24 years. And that's my intro. Nice to be here.
All right, excellent. We're just going to jump into this first question. We'll see if we can get through all of them. This first question really is for everyone. I do have a particular order that I'm going to ask people to respond to. So let's see if we'll see what happens here. So the first question, Stephanie, I'll come to you first. What was the role of your family in your decision to pursue a career in the earth sciences, earth system sciences?
So I was at odds with this question. So I actually went to my mom last night and asked her. And just to give a bit of background, my grandfather came here to the US with a middle school education. Her getting her high school degree was a humongous deal in my family. So the concept of college was just so foreign to us. So geology is also on another level. So she said it was just a grateful opportunity that I was even going to college. So it didn't really matter what I majored in, actually.
And that touches on something that was discussed early on, so about awareness. Thank you. Joshua, I'm going to come to you. What about you?
Great, thank you. So it's interesting because, when we talk about family lives within minorities and immigrants, I think Stephanie's perspective and mine are going to be very polar opposites. So for me, I'm a fourth generation Hispanic here. I'm actually a fourth generation El Pasoan as well. Both of my parents have college educations. My brothers and sisters have college educations. So college was never a question of if we go to college, it was when you go to college. And so that perspective, on how do you gauge first generation, second generation, and third generations is going to be very different, not only for the individual minority group, but also for those individual generations. And so that's one of the things that I've done over time is how do we engage those different generations within these minority systems?
Excellent. Thank you, Joshua. And engagement, certainly part of that retention process. Crystal.
Yes, I'm from the Four Corners region in the United States, from the largest land-based tribe. And it was a place decades ago that many people did uranium mining, and for various reasons. And it was important for me to be able to look at it from an environmental justice standpoint. Obviously, when people they left, and there were a lot of abandoned uranium mines. And so as an earth scientist, I had an idea of, thinking about how do we begin to clean up things like abandoned uranium mines, and we began to think about how that impacts our water. And so it was from an environmental justice standpoint that I went into the earth sciences.
And we're finding that the environmental justice piece, the service learning piece, the more applied nature of science is really attractive to underrepresented groups as they're moving into science. Discovery, certainly important. Basic research, certainly important. But many of these students and individuals want to use science to address some issues. So thank you for sharing that, Crystal. Dr. Crumley, I don't see you on the screen. Are you still there? Maybe you had to step away.
Yes, I am.
Okay, yes, sir.
Hold on a moment.
Okay, well, we'll go to the next person, and we'll come back to you, Dr. Crumley.
Okay.
Okay, Rhea, how about you and family and your career?
Thank you. My family history is similar to Josh. My daughters are fourth generation female college graduates. I'm a second generation female to get a master's degree. I grew up where it was, you will go to college and you'll try to go to the best one you can. As far as geology, I think that what it really opened my eyes to was studying oceanography. And I grew up in an inland state in southwestern Indiana. And a lot of the people who were oceanography graduate students with me were from similar environment. I think that makes you want to explore what you didn't grow up with.
That's an excellent point, Rhea. I'm from southwestern Ohio and had an interest in the ocean, so that was part of that. I resonate with that. Let's go to Dr. Crumley. You back, sir?
Take a seat.
Yes.
Oh, okay. And maybe you could talk to briefly the role of families as it relates to the students that have been part of your program for so many years and the success of those students?
Well, first of all, I was the first to go to college in my family. I was the 7th out of 11 kids. So I was just glad to go to school. I didn't have any role models in which to follow. So that was my pathway. What was the other part of your question? How did that impact?
Right. How did that impact? How does the role of family impact the students that have been in your program? But let's hold that because I want you and Joshua to speak to that part. So let me come back to you. Let me go to Vernon. Yeah, Vernon, can you share the role of family in your early experience to science?
Well, the role of family and early experience to science. So it's interesting. Some of my early interest in science was actually sparked. I wanted to look at the brain because my grandfather was partially lobotomized in the Tuskegee experiment. He was one of the victims of that. And so the stories that I got from my mother about her experience with her father when he had been absent from the family, when he came back to the family, when he was gone again, were pretty traumatic. And I like science, like math. And that was something that when ultimately I decided to go to college, because I wasn't originally thinking about going to college. Both my parents were in the Air Force. And so my generation of siblings were the first to go directly to college. My initial goal was to do something in neuroscience or neurobiology and study the brain. But it was there that I encountered my first Black professors at Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. And, you know, I almost left school about 2 weeks in, but a gentleman kept me in school by giving me a job and buying my books and really bridging me so that I had the money to stay in school. And he was an atmospheric scientist, an atmospheric chemist. And that was my introduction, and that's why I'm here.
Wow, powerful connection to, you know, just a family experience that was traumatic, but propelled you. So thank you for that candor and sharing that. Just to wrap up this question, I did want to hear from Joshua and Dr. Crumley briefly, if they could, to talk about, Joshua, you mentioned this word engagement and engagement of family and the students that have been part of some of the programs and efforts that you're leading or been a part of, and how important is that for the retention of these students?
So yeah, again, so it depends on the generation. So first and second generation family members, I think, are extremely vital in terms of engaging. You know, this concept of their children going into the geosciences is often so foreign to them. And then when we start to use terms like field work, you know, these first and second generation families, you know, this concept of their children going to college and doing field work is counterintuitive. You know, you're not going to college to do field work. You're going to college to get a job. And it's those little tiny nuances within our field that we really need to express to family members. And also the opportunities in terms of jobs, in terms of, you know, education potential. All of these things need to be brought up to these families at different levels, depending on where they are in their generations. What I've always found is engaging third generation family members and parents is very different than first generation families and parents.
Excellent point. So it's not a one size fit all when it comes to strategies.
Yeah. And I think if we think of any of this diversity issue having a silver bullet, that's sorely mistaken. If anything, it's a silver buckshot, you know, where there's going to be multiple points that we're going to have to hit, and not only probably we're going to have to fire more than once. So
excellent analogy. And so for people, I'm coming to you, Dr. Crumley, next. So for people who are thinking that we could just replicate something that was successful in this department or that institution. We'll take it and move it over here. You haven't really done your research about what's needed. If you're thinking that way, I can't say that you haven't, but I would encourage you to do your research about what's going on in your department and really what you want the goals to be, and maybe take bits and pieces from successful programs. But Joshua, your point about a silver bullet versus the buckshot, excellent. Dr. Crumley, family and the success of students in the program that you've managed at Fort Valley. Give you a couple minutes on that.
Okay. Okay, as you know, Fort Valley State is in a rural area of Georgia. Many of the students in the area where we mainly recruit from are from rural areas as well. Most of these kids, I could probably say 99.9% of the students that we are recruiting for the geosciences or earth sciences have never been in earth sciences, or they've never had jobs, they've never had careers in it. So to get these students engaged at a very early age, it is necessary to have what I call a pipeline program. Sometimes it's kind of like knowing mathematics. If you got to wait to get to college to do math, it's a little bit too late. So sometimes the same way of introducing kids to the geosciences, disciplines that African Americans are not used to going into. And so that's the reason we started our pipeline program as a rising ninth graders. And we ease the kids into the pipeline. They have to do a few definitions, but most of ours is exposure and engagement. Students, particularly African-American students, need to be engaged. They need to see these types of things. And so in the ninth grade, we start off gradually. In the 10th grade, we increased their interest or exposure to the geosciences. As a matter of fact, the 10th grade year is hosted in our pre-college program called the Mathematics, Science, and Engineering Academy, or EMC. We take them to the Grand Canyon, and I think probably any geoscientist would, they really truly get excited by seeing, a slice of the earth like that. But one of the things, instead of just the beauty, they're taken down into the Grand Canyon, and they get a chance to see the various layers. So though they're looking at the grandeur, the vista, but we are also gradually having them to look at, there are specific things about this vista. As 11th graders, hosted by the University of Arkansas, hydrogeology is a big thing. Pollution, groundwater movement, that's very important to them. And one of the key things that I think that is so very important with our kids is that once they have gone through the high school for 3 years, they're junior, now all of a sudden they are seniors. And so now what do I do? How can I make a living? And that's very important for African Americans. What do I do with this? And so what we do is we take the students to Texas, Houston, Texas, and some of our sponsors, of course, are the oil and gas companies. And there they get a chance to go to the corporate offices in the buildings, and they get a chance to see what African Americans actually do, or what other people actually do with geoscience degrees. And so that is very important. And if there's an interest, then they're able to go into the collegiate part. And this is one of the things I want to mention here that I think is very important to pipeline program, is that you can interest kids in the high school thing, arena, but if you don't have some place in which to place them after, if you don't have a conduit to get them into the collegiate part, then you're probably going to lose them. And so that is one of the things that we already have in place, is that now if you are interested in the geosciences, okay, we can put you into this dual degree program. And of course, ultimately with our partnering schools, and some of those partnering schools have already visited when they were in the pre-college part, then they are able to go there. So I'm a strong component, obviously, of the pipeline program, particularly when you're starting young with the students.
But thank you for that, Dr. Crumley. So I'm hearing starting in 9th grade, particularly with your program, certainly families have to be aware.
Absolutely.
They're minors, you know, so, and not only be aware, so there's some education on to the families, but also buying in to, okay, I'm letting my young person be involved or go, et cetera. And to Joshua's point, exposure not only to the student, but to the family. And it's different depending on who the students are and who the families are, et cetera. So perfect. Thank you all for a kickoff on that particular question. The second question I'm going to pick on Stephanie and Vernon on this one. And it was already kind of touched on about what sparked your interest in earth sciences. So Vernon kind of already hit on that point. So I'm going to come to him second on another part of the question. But Stephanie, what sparked your actual interest to have you be where you are right now?
So I grew up in Houston, Texas, and you know, we're like the capital of oil. So back then when oil was great, when I was in 9th grade, 2009, I said to myself, you can make that much money looking at rocks? And there just happenstance, 2 programs came into my life, GeoForce Texas, that's centered at the University of Texas, and IPAA, that was part of my middle school to teach us about the oil and gas industry. So there was basically 2 programs begging me to be a geologist and a geologist in the oil and gas industry. And I thought to myself, okay, I can, I come from a single parent household. So I said, I need to get a good job. That, sadly, some people say, I'm going to follow my passions and my dreams. And I was like, that's great, but I need to put food on the table, kind of thing. Also, once I got to college, I now realize, hearing other stories, how much my undergrad and graduate advisors helped me out. Those were the times where, I felt like I was going to slip out. Although I had a village getting me to college to keep me in college, I feel like that's where we're lacking personally. And they turned me into a planetary scientist because I got to see them filling out NSF grants. And I was like, the government gives you money for that? Like, I had no, you don't know about that. So a lot of them rubbed up on me. So that's kind of my pathway, both, so it took like several people and several hours to help me out. And I'm very thankful for that.
Wow. So I'm looking at or remembering Crystal's comment about environmental justice pushing her. Yours was more socioeconomic. It sounds like, I got to get a job, and this looks like a great way to make some money. Vernon's was a very personal family issue that sparked him. So none of these, and not to poo-poo the idea of discovery and basic research, but so many times BIPOC individuals don't have the luxury of, oh, let me just think about, or have access to, as Dr. Crumley's talked about, exposure to opportunities. Oftentimes life is what they're really dealing with. And that's a way to introduce them and expose them to, hey, science can help you with, particularly in some of these instances, with what's going on in life. Vernon, I'm going to come to you with another part of this question. Stephanie kind of got to it when she was talking about mentoring, and I think others talked about having individuals in leadership positions that look like them. For you, how important is that, and maybe what would have made your experience easier? What could you share with a student who might be in your shoes now?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting. There's 2 very different questions. What would have made it easier is, I grew up and I still think I'm growing up through a very interesting time. But I think the first part was the role models. Was it not?
Yes.
And so as I said, I never saw a a BIPOC instructor until I got to college. And even in going to college, I made the decision after I actually visited Atlanta and saw so many Black people gathered in one place, looking like they were having fun and they were actually in school. I was on my way to, a career, trying to do professional boxing or join the Air Force. That was what I had ultimately decided by the end of high school, because my experience was so negative. Each time I was placed in an advanced course in high school, for some reason I was reassigned to auto shop or to wood shop or to some other course that was not on a college track. And my parents actually helped, my mother especially, put me back in those courses to get me on track. So, what would make it, my parents were major role models. There's no doubt about that. And then once I got to college, I think it was a similar experience as Stephanie. I was, people helped me out and saw potential in me that had not been seen, or nobody gave me any indication throughout high school. Gave me opportunities to work on papers, present papers at national meetings as a teen. And as I looked at them, they were having so much fun in what they were doing. I'd never observed someone in a job having that much enjoyment in the job. My professor went to China and worked collaboratively over there, came back and was traveling the world. And I'd talk to him sometimes and he'd say, well, oh yeah, I thought of this. And so I wrote a grant and I got this. And I'm like, so someone pays you to work on ideas that you came up with, and you basically work for yourself and you get to travel the world. And I like, why would I do anything different than what you're doing? And right. So I just was like a puppy. But, there was a lot of difficult things. Being basically destitute in undergrad is difficult. And what you do to try to make it through are often struggles in silence. You're just trying to make it through. When you show up to class, it's unlikely that the professor knows what you went through to get there that day, or what you're going to need to do to get there the next day, or will I be here next semester? And so I think financial challenges are real at the undergraduate level. And I think that was one major issue. I think it would have been greater to have role models, along the way. I think outside of my family that might have given me opportunities in science fairs. And, I never was at a science fair, never presented anything during high school. Really enjoyed science, but never got those opportunities. And so I think that led to some of my passion in generating and developing programs today, was that I don't think there's enough of those opportunities, as I think Ike was describing, that get you at the high school level and talk to your parents and get you at the undergrad level. I was never in a REU program. So I think those are very valuable experiences. But I do agree there's a myriad of pathways that people come into those, a myriad of experiences that they bring with them. And I think capturing and retaining folks, like myself, and unlike myself, I think takes a lot more creative intentionality than has been applied over the past 40 years. And I think that's why you miss out. People, when you look at numbers and you miss the person, your retention is going to be low. And so some of the comments in the box, I would say, don't look for the number, look for the person who's a good fit and talk to the person. Don't talk past them. Don't, look at the person, because that's what kept me in. People saw me.
Right. And that's powerful. And that's a great segue to this next question, but I just kind of I heard some words that came out of our this last bit of discussion about intentionality, about engagement, exposure. Stephanie talked about awareness, and in you as well too. Oh, this could be a viable career path and I can make a good living, at it. And so those are all things, if you think from a business perspective, you would wrap up in a nice marketing package and send with the marketing team out to whatever market you were trying to recruit from. But I don't know if the geosciences do that very well. And so Rhea, I'm going to come to you as a transition to this point. What could be done to make geoscience, but in particularly the earth sciences, more attractive to individuals to bring them in, or to make departments or areas more welcoming for folks?
Thank you, Brandon. I have some thoughts about this, and they relate to having seen AGI's reports essentially all my career and the data that Chris and Susan collect and presented. One of the things we tend to focus on with diversity and inclusion is just diversity. And we tend to measure diversity with tons of metrics. And as Chris's data show, we are very good at it, but we don't measure inclusion, and we don't have metrics for inclusion. And I think in part it's because we look at who participates rather than looking at the gatekeepers as well as who participates. And I have a couple of suggestions for how the data gathering and analysis could be changed. One is in AGI as an umbrella organization for 50 professional societies, most of which grant fellows honors to their members. It would be very interesting if the approach that AGI takes for students, that they took that just to academic fellows granted by all their societies, and asked the professors who are being made a fellow how many in each of the categories that they're using right now for students, how many did you graduate? How many did you have in your class? How many did you mentor because you were on their committee? I think if that information were collected for 5 years, it would be the kind of wake-up call for societies to find out our values when we honor people at the height of their career are not the same as the values when we talk in forums like this one. And that is the only way I think we'll see really meaningful change, is if people look at data that's there and realize where their priorities really are lying. I also have another observation. One of the things that was very interesting to me from my alma mater for my master's degree is that even with the decline in enrollment under COVID-19, the environmental sciences grew in enrollment. And this was for Oregon State's College of Earth, Oceanic and Atmospheric Sciences, and for their eCampus. And it was, to me, it talks to the human value and to where geology is going to be valued in the future, not just by minorities, but by all students. So I just urge people to think about those things. And
wow, great. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, yeah.
I just yield my time.
Great suggestions about that. I was thinking as you were talking about the fellows. I'm going to come to you, Joshua, for some comments on this as well. In academia, there's we'll call it the economy of the academy, there's a currency. All economies have a currency. And the currency to operate in the academic economy that you have to generate as grants, publications, research findings, et cetera. That's the main currency. You look at, as you mentioned, if we looked at all the fellows across all the societies at the height of their career, well respected in their science areas, what was their broader impact on the individuals that they mentored, touched, taught, et cetera, sat on committees? What does that look like? Yeah, I think that's an awesome point. And it relates to, for instance, the program at NSF like Career or PCASE, where there are two criteria for career. There's the science, and then there's the education or the community part of that, the societal part of that, which mirrors NSF's intellectual merit and broader impact criteria. So, where is the academy as far as valuing certain types of currency that are generated that for the most part have not been part of the tenure system, the promotion system, the award system, the hiring system, et cetera? What do we do with that? So Joshua, I want to turn to you for your thoughts on, making this whole thing more welcoming for individuals and ideas.
You know what? I think Dr. Crumley had a great point. We have the Grand Canyon. We have jobs that start at $90,000 with a master's in industry. I mean, there shouldn't be things that we have that we need to make it more attractive. It's there. It's there. I think if there was a single silver bullet thing that we can correct in the geosciences, it's this either cultural or this societal issue of what geology is. We don't have a poster child, for lack of a better word, for geologists here in the United States. You can ask 5 random people on the street to name one famous geologist, and I would be surprised if they could. Could they name a biologist or a physicist or an astrophysicist? They probably could if you gave them enough chances. But for geology, we have this really big dilemma where our society doesn't necessarily know what we do. And when you have, this is something that I've always thought, that geology has a soccer problem. If you go to any park during the weekend, you see all of these kids in soccer camps, right? They're doing soccer all the way up until about 5th grade. Then about 5th grade, they go to more professional league sports like baseball and football, to the point where we don't have any soccer teams or anything of any significance here in the United States. In geology, how many kids do we know start off with rock collections? There's this intense interest in the natural world that begins at a very young age, but that interest is never engaged in K through 12, as you stated, Brandon. And so a child who does have that rock collection and is never engaged on how to appreciate it and how to interpret it is going to lose interest in that and is going to get diverged to something that is more popular, that's on the cultural mindset of engineering, of biology, of law, those areas that aren't suffering this deficit in minorities. So if we as a society had a better understanding of what geologists are, what we do, and our value to society, I don't think that we would be actively recruiting. They would be actually coming to us.
Excellent point. Wow. So we talked about the awareness for family and maybe communities, but you just went, there's an issue with awareness at the societal level that feeds into everything as it relates to education or exposure or awareness, et cetera. As a funny connection to that, well, I'll think it's funny. Every Hollywood disaster movie is a geo-related disaster. So why not take the students to go see one of these? And they're all horrible movies as far as science is concerned. So that is a wide open opportunity to teach correctly about earthquakes or volcanoes or tidal waves or tsunamis or whatever it is. So yeah, great points. Thank you, Ray and Joshua, for that. Crystal, I'm going to come to you. We'll transition, but this relates to the intentionality that we've heard some of the other panelists talk about. And the question is, if you are involved in a program or have been, either you are in charge of one or you were involved as a student or what have you, what about that program worked that you know, that you were attracted to or helped you, or that you are intentional if you're running a program? What are those factors about the program that make it successful?
I'll give you an example of why I am where I am today. It's the American Indian Science and Engineering Society. I participated in their Native American Science and Engineering fair as a 4th grader, and I am still participating. This week they have their national conference, and I had the opportunity to participate in a program they have called Lighting the Pathway. It's to be able to increase the number of Native Americans as faculty at academic institutions. My career did not lead me to a faculty position, but I am sitting on a number of different masters and different committees at different academic institutions. But it's the portion that Susan had talked about in her presentation about, let's not just try to recruit people, but really look at retention. And I see that across the board, even just minority, underrepresented individuals that going into higher education, whether it be a bachelor's, a master's, a PhD program, there's a lot of effort in the beginning, but there's not a lot of effort at these institutions or within these societies to be able to keep people there. And with this program, Lighting the Pathway that I'm talking about, it's that constant engagement. There's a mentorship, there's networking. Now we have Zoom meetings to be able to have virtual talking circles. And it's not necessarily just talking about, you know, the challenges of being in academia. At this, in the pandemic, it's about our challenges overall, our home challenges with the pandemic. Maybe it's related to losing loved ones, having people be sick. You know, it's just all these other things, the election, the protests, and that all impacts who we are as individuals. So rather looking at the human rather than concentrating on the scholar, it's important that we understand all those things, the social, the mental, the physical, all those aspects. And one of the things with the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, we as Native American people are very spiritual. So they also include that rather than exclude that from their presentations, whether it be a conference, it be networking at a leadership summit, those sort of things. So that's been very successful. And I'm proud to say that on the Lighting the Pathway Zoom meeting that we had a good number of representation for earth scientists. And so that graph that we seen that Chris shared, although it was almost near the 0 line, I'm almost positive that a lot of those people that I was able to interact with yesterday were represented on that graph, although it looked very small in number.
Thank you for that, Crystal. While I'm just sitting here thinking about your statement about the spirituality piece and how certain systems, and we can say the science system, have not allowed for multiple ways of knowing, multiple ways of learning, multiple ways of existing in the world. And you know, Vernon made this very same point as it relates to the statistics and the way we measure things. That stop looking at this individual as a number in some predefined way that you're looking at them versus them as an entire person. So that's very, I mean, that's, to me, that's one of the key points to the retention issue of many of these cultures and groups of people that the geosciences are struggling with. One of the other things I'm thinking about, I'm going to come to you, Dr. Crumley, to talk about the program and why it's successful, is that the geosciences, I would argue, probably the original sciences. Okay, to Joshua's point, who didn't have a rock collection? I would argue geosciences and maybe the ecological sciences, biology, because along with the rock collection, I probably had a couple of earthworms and some bugs, you know, so lightning bugs in the summertime and things of that nature. So that curiosity is there, but like Joshua mentioned, it's something happens as students, you know, move through the system. And Crystal, how many of them through an established or institutional system lose their identity and their cultural awareness and what makes them whole and what allow them to thrive and what is needed. So excellent points. Dr. Crumley, and we have probably around 10 minutes. We're wrapping up. The last question is going to be wide open. It's going to be the big one. But Dr. Crumley, the program that you talked about, that you've run for many years there at the Fort Valley State University, what has made that program successful? And is it a program that institutions need to take a look at as far as replicating and scaling? So what's made it successful, and can it be replicated?
Okay. Well, let me start with the first part. First of all, let me make this statement. There is no one silver bullet to getting minorities into the geosciences. Our program, there are several best practices that are involved, and all of those best practices attribute to the success of the program. First of all, it starts with in K-12. By having a pre-collegiate part of the program, you're introducing the kids at an earlier time. They probably didn't know anything about the geosciences, but you're introducing them as you go along. The other part is that if we only had the K-12 part and not the collegiate part that the students had access to, because you really don't get a geoscience degree in high school, you got to go to college. So you got to connect the students to an opportunity to go through college to access the collegiate degree. So we got actually 2 access points. They can come through the pre-college program. Our kids who are not in MC can come through as high school seniors. So that's very important. The other one is the students are in cohorts. You know, we go through the pre-college program. They come in and rising 9th graders, but that group will stay together through high school, college, and on for the rest of their life. And students, educationally, by being in cohorts, you tend to help each other. So that's very important. Out of this program, one of the, to me, is absolutely essential is that scholarships. If you don't have, even if I were to look at some of the kids who even went through MC, if we didn't have the scholarship portion of it, they might leave the geosciences and go to engineering or something of that nature. So without funding with these programs, it is just absolutely kind of disastrous. The other thing that is very important in our program, and this is where keeping that geoscience continuity going, is that although Fort Valley State University does not offer degrees in the geosciences, it's our partnering universities that offer those degrees, award those degrees. But what is important to us is that our kids, there are 3 courses that are offered here in geology. And of course, we're fortunate that we have a professor named Dr. Carr, who is very enthusiastic about the geosciences. And so it's very important because a student gets a chance to see what geology is like at Fort Valley State University before he or she transfers to the major university to get the degree. The other one is, of course, we're fortunate with the CDEP program because we have mentors and role models. We have 47 that have already graduated. So even when there's kids in the 9th and the 12th grade, when they go to the industry, they're seeing other CDEP graduates. And so that's very important. The other one is internships and professional development. Our students get a chance to, go to workshops, go to national meetings, the NABG meeting, they have NSBE to go to. So all of that is going on concurrently as they're going through this. And here's another important thing that emanates throughout our program is that the students know that we have connections they're going to be connected to the stakeholders or the employers. A number of the students who are in the CDAP program, they are working in energy and other good places. They have good paying jobs. And so without students knowing that they could connect to some of the major oil and gas companies starting off with a good salary, that would be a real problem. So you can see that there are a lot of components that you really actually have to have, I think, in order to make a program really work for the students.
Thank you, Dr. Crumley. Yeah, I wrote down 9. I probably missed some, but the K through 12 phase, and there's got to be an intentional connection to something after that, that collegiate portion. Cohorts are key. Funded scholarships are key. Having collaborating institutions are key. Dedicated faculty like Dr. Carr and you know, Dr. Morris and Joshua, those that are here. Engaged alums from the program so that incoming participants can see role models, as was mentioned before. Professional development. So it's not just about the research, but it's about addressing all of these other skills that they're going to need to be successful, and then having a network to plug them into. Well, there you go, folks. If you wanted the buckshot approach that Joshua talked about, you better hit on all of those. And I'm sure you have some institutional specific or context specific areas you need to address too. So that's awesome. All right, 10 minutes, 9 minutes. We're going to move into the big question. I'm going to start with Stephanie on this one, and this is really open for anyone. So, you know, kind of give me a hand if you want to, you have something to say. But this is the issue about really what we talk about, retention and things of that nature. And I want to make sure I say this right. What have you seen and where you are as a student and you're moving through as the most significant barrier, you know, that issue that is keeping individuals from being recruited into or retained or what have you, in particular BIPOC individuals in the geosciences?
So again, I had all this support like going in, but going to a university like UT, it was a culture shock, you know. I had, you know, as diverse as Houston is, it's very segregated. So I had never really interacted with different cultures and such. And I really like the point you said about fitting the square peg in the circle. I think like someone also asked, well, we all come from different cultures and such. When we're teaching, how do we knock out everything? So when I got to university, I felt like everything was very individualized. It was competitive. Academia is very competitive at all levels. So, you know, a change in that culture. And sadly, you know, discrimination and microaggressions. And some people can't report it. I felt that it mirrored a lot about the Academy's sexual assault report. You know, some people already left and they don't want to, it's trauma. It's psychological trauma. And again, it's a lot of frustration. If, for example, if I raise issues directly relating to, hey, this is my background, this is why I'm struggling, it was a lot of frustration. And like, I just feel like we're not accommodating everyone. And then the question is, well, we all learn differently. How do we hit all of it all at once? But I would like to see, you know, more penalties for that kind of behavior. And it's also a question of how do we police people's behavior? I don't have that answer. I don't run a department, but to me, it's a safety issue. And again, like my advisors are awesome. Not everyone's advisor is awesome. Some tell them to go home or you're not cut out for this PhD. I've seen it firsthand with my friends and we're not talking about it, or those stories are being told. And a big way was this hashtag Black in the Ivory. from student to faculty, you know, all the microaggressions that everyone faces that you might not know, or again, sometimes you can't even talk about it because you're afraid you're going to be difficult or something like that, or oh, don't say anything in front of her, she's gonna report you or something like that. But to me, at the end of the day, it's a safety issue. So I think that's what I think that was the biggest barrier for people in my age group right now. It's still happening. There was lots of times where I was like, is this the 1950s? Like, you know, that kind of joke, like, you know, this is 2012. Why is this still happening? It was very Twilight Zone episode like. So I think that's my final answer.
Yeah. Well, and again, thank you for that candor. Ray, I'm going to come to you in a minute, but Stephanie, you hit on so many things there, and that take-home message of it's it's professional violence. It's intellectual bullying, and it goes beyond that in many instances. You know, from the Me Too movement to Black in the Ivory to, you know, so we have all of these movements. We have many, I would say, identity generated societies. So we have the main professional societies, but we have Earth Science Women's Network and Geo-Latinas and Geoscience Alliance, Native Americans National Association for Black Geoscientists. You know, so we have these groups. People are building their own cohorts, as Dr. Crumley said, because there's a need that they weren't getting from the main professional societies. And that's not a knock to the professional societies, because that's not why they were founded. But there needs to be recognition as to why these other societies are forming. And you're safe in that space, I'm sure. I know I am when I'm moving through some of those areas. So thank you for that. That's powerful. Rhea, what do you think about this barrier issue?
I think that there is, people think about cultural identity, and there's supportive cultural identity and there's imposed cultural identity. And sometimes well-meaning people are looking at being helpful and supportive through their imposed cultural identity rather than being allowing the cultural identity that the person has to be supported and giving them space and honoring and supporting it. And that's something that I'm not sure programs and, you know, coming up with new ways of doing things will necessarily change. It's more a discussion and a recognition and sort of making an intention, like when you do yoga, that you're going to be supportive of someone's cultural identity instead of imposing your version of cultural identity upon them. And that's bigger than even the issue we're talking about. I think that the academic setting could benefit from everybody who's an administrator that went through promotion and tenure always teaching one class as part of it. Would just bring much more connection to other faculty, it bring connection to administrative decisions. And those aren't things that a program does, they're things people decide to do because they realize there are new ways to be supportive that they aren't invoking at the moment.
Wow, that's powerful. So it's a decision. People just have to make a decision that they're going to do better or that they're going to do something different and to make you know, things better for individuals. And that requires some self-reflection about how you got where you were and where you are. And back to a word I heard earlier, are you a gatekeeper? And if you are, what are you doing about that? So thank you. I'm going to go to Crystal, had her hand up. And Crystal, I'm going to give you last word on this. We're going to turn things over after your answer to Elizabeth so we could go to questions from the board and the participants. And the panelists can then chime in on those questions. But Crystal?
Yeah, so I just wanted to talk about, how can recruitment and retention be addressed? And for Native Americans, Latinx, African Americans, and all the other minorities as well. Polynesians are in there. We think about time and effort. I think it boils down to that. When we work with other individuals, for example, my communication style is different in our own tribal nation, as opposed to when I went in to climb the ladders of collegiate levels. And it took time, and I'm glad I was able to communicate that with my research advisors. And I'm glad they took the effort to be able to understand that. Oftentimes I feel like, people want to stay at status quo because status quo is easy. It doesn't require a lot of effort, and it doesn't require a lot of time. So you don't have to go above and beyond when you're already trying to reach all those metrics of teaching, research, service to stay where you're at least in the academic field. And when you think about this new effort of having someone that comes from Indigenous community, in my experience, their ideas of doing research in the community requires more time and effort because that funding is not there. And although that funding is not there, there's ways to innovatively think about how you can fund this type of research, but it takes time and effort. And oftentimes I feel like earth sciences, although we think about geologic timescale and we think, there's a lot of time to do more things during a short amount of time, there's time and effort that needs to be done. And I would encourage those individuals in the audience today who wants to do that recruitment and retention and bring up those numbers of individuals like myself on the panel, as well as others, to be able to take that time and effort to do the recruitment and do the retention.
Thank you for that, Crystal. That's a great place to kind of wind down the discussion here of the panel. It takes time and it takes effort. And it's got to be intentional. We have to, and we can't do it by ourselves. So it takes all of us, and we have to be able to collaborate. And when that happens, we have to value each other. And to your point about translation and code switching, understand that there are going to be cultural nuances that may, or not may, but will fly in the face of the status quo. But that's not a bad thing. I mean, how else is anything going to evolve if there's not new information that comes? Otherwise, you're going to have a monoculture of inbreeding that's going to cause some problems. So, Elizabeth, thank you for the panel. This has been awesome. This is kind of the formal part of the discussion. We're now going to turn it over to Elizabeth. If there are questions from the board and the participants for the panel, now is the time.
Hello, Brandon. That was an excellent panel. Really, really, really super. If I could stand up and applaud, well, I can, but I won't right now. That was fantastic. I'm actually going to turn the floor over to Isabel, and she, I think, will pick up the questions from the board and transition as we go through the rest of the panel here. So Isabel, I'll turn things over to you. But wonderful job, panel, and thank you so much, Brandon. You too.
Pleasure.
Thank you. And I too want to thank everyone. Just wonderful and enlightening. And I was busy taking notes because it's just all, I need to reflect on this much longer. I have a question from Carol Harden. And please, when you, the board, when you ask your questions, maybe quickly just remind everyone who's speaking. Carol.
This is Carol. I'm unable to start my video. Oh, the host has asked me to start my video. Okay. I'm addressing my question to Stephanie. I really thought this panel, the entire panel, was really valuable. And Stephanie, you are in just the hot seat of what we've been talking about today, in this space between where people are recruited into a system and then when they come out the other end. And we've talked so much about retention, and you have just the bird's eye view. I'd love it if you could just unpack a little bit more your comments about safety and discrimination, and in a way that might help us think about how to address these. For instance, are you feeling that more from your peers or from the faculty? And is there a solution besides these? Is there a local solution? Could there be some kind of person who you would feel comfortable going to if you didn't feel comfortable reporting? I don't know. Could you just talk a little bit more about that? Thanks.
So often they always say go to the UMBUS office or something like that, but I've had friends that have had other issues and they go and it just gets dismissed because there's no really things. So, and another thing is, in addition to not having representation at the faculty level, you'll have awesome faculty that want to make that change, but who's above them and above them and above them? You don't have a lot of diverse department heads and deans. So some efforts that, want to be more inclusive, they'll get shut down immediately or in a weird way or some kind of way. I think, again, and I felt it from the faculty and admin level. However, again, talking to my friends, a lot of them feel them from like bad advisors. And if you think about it, we don't train our advisors to mentor. Like they don't, and some people say, why should I be your mentor? I'm just your research advisor. So yeah, I don't have the answers because then there's like legality things, but again, these things happen each and every day. And again, if you browse through that hashtag Black in the Ivory, you'll see that, and it happens at all levels. So it's basically like, to me, it was like I needed someone to be my voice on a upper level. I think that's what I needed or wanted.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful.
Great. We're going to take a couple more questions from the board, and then Brandon, do you have access to the audience questions, or would you like me to field them for you? I'm happy to do that.
I see some in the Google Doc.
Yes. Okay,
So,
would you like to do the, let me take a couple more from the board, Estella and then Scott, and then I'm going to hand it back to you, Brandon.
Thank you.
So I just want to say thank you for some really wonderful discussions that we've had this afternoon. And the question I have for any of the panelists is we all raised the fact, or you raised the fact about awareness, where there's a disconnect about the role of geoscientists in society and what people actually know that what we do. So the question is, to what degree is the geosciences being hurt by the fact that the last time that our kids get earth sciences in schools is like 6th grade or 7th grade. And that when you get into high school, the geosciences is considered kind of like a soft kind of science, not a hard science. So to what degree are we really being hurt because our high schools in this country do not value geosciences as a hardcore science to be provided as AP classes, and all the students are left with is math, chemistry, physics, biology? And what can we do to change that?
Joshua.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I've asked this question across many states and many of my colleagues across the United States, especially at the community college level, because we've worked very closely with the K through 12, especially the high school side. And what I have found that it really varies from state to state on what the state standards are, what the state is expecting K through 12 to teach. So even in Texas, we're the oil industry in this country. The geosciences is not promoted very heavily within K through 12 at all. It's briefly mentioned in a few grade levels, but not as systemic as it really should be. So to answer the question, I think if there were people who felt that this is a huge issue for them locally, I would highly, highly recommend that you engage K through 12 educators to see where they're teaching it and how you can help them reinforce those ideas when they are teaching it. So if it's only a few lessons in 3rd grade, then have your students go out there and make a phenomenal presentation to those students during that time period. I know a lot of those educators, K through 12, don't have that geoscience background, and they are thirsty for anybody to help them create content for their students during those time periods.
Scott.
Yes. Hi. Well, I want to thank Brandon for doing a masterful job moderating that session. That was a fantastic session. And I also want to put in a plug for all of the panelists. You all put together very short but very powerful introductions today that are available on video. And I would recommend any in the audience to go look at those. It takes you only about 30 minutes, but you'll hear some great stuff there to supplement what we've already heard. And one of the things that I heard on several of those presentations, and also during your talks today, kind of an Achilles heel to the whole pipeline discussion is the issue that comes at kind of the back end. Once people are in either in the academic world or the government world or the industry, private sector world, is there an environment of inclusion where people are really welcomed and feel that they want to be retained? And Stephanie did a great job talking about some issues of that in her experience. I'm wondering if any of the others of you have any comments that you'd like to share about, what one key thing could we do on inclusion that would really make a step change?
This is Ria. I will talk a little bit about that. I think that one of the things that helped for myself, because often I was the only one in the room, as it were, and is that I found it didn't matter who a person was, if they were very interested in geology and being mentored, that they came to people who they viewed as being successful. So I never felt that I wasn't successful, even if I worked in places where I might not feel super included. And I think that that's something that maybe not everyone looks at, but a lot of people look at a person who obviously had a lot of hurdles as a person they want to be their mentor because they probably know more and can be more helpful. And so I just throw that out as maybe a way to look at retention once people get their degrees.
Can I make a quick point?
Sure.
I think that, at least in the academy, hiring BIPOC faculty, which is always an avoided issue, is part of the solution. And it has to be part of the solution. And I think, looking at the gatekeeping that goes on when candidates of color apply for positions, get into the pool, if or whether or not they get to a place where they can present, I think examining that very closely and what faculty, what departments, academic departments are actively doing to address that. Because a lot of times, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, there's this apathy, the greatest evil, if you see a problem, is the silence, is the inaction, is the, what do we do when you kind of know what you need to do? You need to get better representation. People are graduating. There are people doing fantastic things in a variety of sectors. They could also be doing fantastic things in the academic sector, but there are very clear protocols and procedures and networks that lock them out. And I think addressing that would be a huge part of the problem.
Joshua, sorry.
Yeah, if I can speak to both of those comments, I think in my experience that the strongest tool that we have in academia is the mentor. One of the things that I feel makes an extremely strong mentor is not only someone who's passionate, but also compassionate. And so even by having to identify a single person within a department who will take the charge of mentoring students, whether they are minority students or not, and through all of the myriad ways that a student can actually stumble in academia. I mean, I know that I see a lot of students going through college, experiencing things that when I went through college, I would have never experienced. I mean, financial aid issues, work issues, home issues, food insecurity issues. I mean, these are things that, a true mentor is really going to be able to understand and be able to address by knowing what resources their institution and department has. So I just want to give a shout out that I think that a good solid mentor in any institution is probably one of the best first steps that any institution can take to solve this diversity issue.
Brandon, would you like to field the questions from the audience?
Sure. There's a bit of a challenge here because there are a lot, which I'm really excited about, which means that the audience is engaged and have some really thoughtful questions. I'm trying to pick out a few here, and hopefully when I read them, if the individual who asked the question is on, if they want to, turn their cameras on and elaborate, that would be great. So one of them I'm looking at says, what are philanthropic organizations doing to support students in need? What areas of support are low-hanging fruit that philanthropic organizations might provide meaningful impact? So this gets at this issue of broadening the ecosystem for support of students, and not just the academy or not just federal agencies, but nonprofits, professional societies, in this instance, intentional nonprofits like philanthropic that have money. So I'm not sure who asked that question, but I'm throwing it out to the panel. Any first responses about that? I have a comment myself, but I want to hear from, Joshua.
Yeah, sorry. This is a great question. And, one of the things coming from a two-year college, a lot of our faculty aren't necessarily aware how to write grants, or they may not have institutions that are able to handle large grants like from the NSF. And so I think some of these philanthropic organizations can definitely help out K through 12, as well as the two-year college organizations that oftentimes don't have access to resources to get some of the equipment that's needed to really promote the geosciences within their classrooms.
I would like to comment, Brandon.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
That's a very important question. Actually, our program, of course, operates off of, I'm constantly writing grants, also corporations, partnering corporations who are actually stakeholders or employers of our kids. But it would be very helpful if we had just philanthropic organizations to provide the funding. So when you look at it, if we see that program has produced 47 geoscientists, and we still have those in the pipeline in high school as well as the collegiate part. Although the 47 might be a decent number, very decent number when you think about African Americans going to geology and geophysics, but we could have done far more if we would have had more funding or additional funding. That could have been quadruple, triple, or many, many times over. The number of students that we let into the program each year is really dependent upon the amount of money that we have each year, because once you bring a kid into on scholarship in a 3+2 program, you're talking about 5 years of securing that individual's funding. Plus the fact you got to think about bringing in funding for the other classes that's coming behind each year. So I think philanthropic organizations would be very important with increasing the number of African Americans and other minorities in the geosciences. They got to have financial access.
So while, oh, go ahead, Isabel.
Oh, Brandon, when you're done with this particular topic, Ria has her hand up.
Oh, well, go ahead.
Oh, mine, thank you, Isabel and Brandon. My comments very brief, but as far as philanthropic aid, one place to look at is for science fair funding. I remember doing lots of fundraising for science fairs, and that's an area where I think philanthropic attention could yield a lot of results.
Excellent, thank you for that. While we're talking about funding, there's a question that came in that talks about the ways that graduate students are supported and how challenging that is. The example that is provided is that students work typically, or for example, as a 50% TA during the academic year and the full-time in the summer. Students must survive the first 9 months on very low wages, even if the annual wages are okay. You know, what can we do to change this model? So oftentimes when I've seen this question or fielded it, the federal agencies point to, in particular, NSF, the GRFP. And I think, Stephanie, you said you're a current fellow, NSF graduate fellow. Mm-hmm. And of course, that the fellowship gives students financial flexibility, but it also gives them flexibility in their research because they're not tied to a grant that their advisor or someone else is involved in. And so this funding model, you're throwing it out to the group here, this funding model for graduate students, and this is mainly an academic question. Maybe Vernon, I'll ask you to start. What do we, you know, what can be done about that? This is an ancient model. And when I say ancient, that apprentice mentorship model that the academy is built on is a couple thousand years old. So, you know, Plato and Socrates kind of thing. But Vernon, what do you think about this funding model?
Well, you know, we've had some offline conversations on this, but I do think that it's a challenge for a number of the existing faculty to be the single point of contact, or as I think Susan said, single point of failure for a lot of students of color. And I think that's almost an undue weight to expect. And so I think one thing is, in terms of the model, is thinking of a community model of mentoring where you have enough people inside the department, perhaps outside the department, collaborating departments that can address the different needs of the students who are coming in, who may come into, I think someone from Idaho posted a question. So if I had gone to Idaho as my 21-year-old self going into grad school, I would have been looking for some community out there. I would have wanted someone who knows, where can I go get a haircut? Where can I go to church? Where can I connect with people who look like me? And the person I might want to do research with might not know any of that, but there's probably someone who does. And they could serve that part of my community mentorship cohort that would help me feel like, oh, this is a place I can stay. And so I think, yeah, turn that other model upside down. I think another part, at least from a critical mentoring framework, is that the mentor has to be prepared to learn from the student as well. Students bring a lot to the equation in terms of innovation, the innovation paradox that just came out and proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. There's a lot of creative students who come in because of their way of knowing, because of their culture, because of their spirituality, that might think of a problem very differently And if there's no sensitivity to that, it just gets crushed. Just gets, now that's not research. That's not valued here. And a community of mentors might find more constituency in saying, no, that's interesting. Let's talk about that. And so I think that's one part of it. But to your funding question, I think there's some, I think the philanthropic question could help support that. I think institutions trying to be creative about how to support the students that they bring in, generally speaking. Here's who we brought in, how do we support these people? If I see the students that we brought in, how do we put together a package that can help those students versus the one size fits all? So I think we've kind of covered the ground. It's just, where do you implement these things as you ask these questions? Because the answers tend to kind of be the same. Look at who you're trying to help be successful. What do they need? How do you provide that? And instead of, why can't we do it? How do we do this? Right? That's a challenge. How do we work this out? Let's actually be scientific about this. Instead of saying it's so hard, I don't know if we can do this. As scientists, we see a hard problem, we're all over it. We're all over it with creativity. Here's a hard problem, and it goes back to your racial stamina, and we just don't have the stomach for it. Oh, this is still so hard. And I think we've just got to stop being, I don't want to say gutless, but we got to work it up. Let's work up our stamina in the same way that we do science. Let's attack this the same way we'd attack a tough science problem, with all of our intent and energy.
Excellent point, Vernon. Until we move, I come to you real quick, Dr. Crumley. We move back and forth in a, depending on when it's convenient, into a asset model or a deficit model, or how we want to approach things. And I'll reiterate, if you look at our planet and what's going on, aside from the politics, aside from the social issues, just environmentally, we can't afford to continue the way we've continued as far as solution creation and generation. Yeah. We just can't do it. We gotta have more people at the table with different ways of knowing and understanding and seeing. We have to. You know, back to Hollywood, everyone is not gonna be able to jump on a spaceship and go somewhere else. So we better figure it out. Dr. Crumley.
Yeah, just briefly. I think that the previous question had reference to graduate students. Well, when you really think about scholarships, particularly at PWIs or larger institutions, there's more money around, there's more money around for graduate studies than there. Those institutions really very rarely have very much scholarship for undergraduate students. And so with my program, most of it is undergraduate. Even at Fort Valley, and when they transfer that first degree before they get a master's, it's still undergraduate. And that's one of the challenges that we really have. You know, with HBCUs, much of our scholarship money happens to be with undergraduate as opposed to research. Not all institutions, but much of it is. And so it's really kind of hard to get scholarship money for undergraduate.
Brandon, did you want to look at the audience questions?
Yeah, I was looking at one here, and I wanted to come to Crystal about it. And it was about, there were kind of two questions, and they kind of merge. I'll read them. There can be considerable drop off of minority geoscience graduate majors getting jobs or applying to grad school. And how do we encourage them to move forward in the geosciences? And related, we, I guess the royal we, usually point to high paying opportunities in oil and gas when it comes to geoscience careers, but those opportunities, they say, are declining, and they and environmental jobs pay significantly less. So how do we encourage people to go into these fields? So it's this issue of retention, either in the academy or once out of the academy, or whenever they leave the pathway to go into a job. How do we retain them in these tracks in the pathway as it relates to, this is not funding, but this is salaries and being paid and careers, et cetera.
It's interesting that you bring up this point now, thinking about those individuals lighting the pathway program that I had mentioned previously. A lot of the students on there are masters and PhD, and they're afraid of this time of the pandemic and, you know, going at the completion of their degree and how do they stay in what they're doing. And I think it's about thinking about being adaptive and entertaining ideas. In science, when we first create a hypothesis, it doesn't always go as we plan, right? And so it's important for us to think about that there's not just one pathway to being successful, but rather a number of different pathways to being successful, whether it's an individual in the earth sciences in academia or an individual in earth sciences in industry in a private sector, or in my case, in a tribal nation sector of trying to help my tribal nation to be able to use my earth sciences background in that way. So it's important to open up the idea of success in the earth sciences and contributors in the earth sciences equally. So, I mean, we all come from different backgrounds. We have igneous, sedimentary, metamorphic, volcanology. We have hydrogeologists, geochemists. Rather than pitting us against one another, thinking that, you know, we're all at different levels, we're all a part of earth sciences. And it's important to think of us equally and equitably as contributors to those aspects. Doesn't matter the color of our skin. It doesn't matter about our gender or all these different aspects, our age. A lot of times I think, you know, it makes us think that older people, just because they're older, are, you know, more knowledgeable and smarter than us and deserve more than us. And as younger individuals, it can relate to imposter syndrome and comparison. So it's important for us to stop comparing ourselves to each other, but rather thinking about how we're all inclusive to answering different questions that are very challenging scientific questions that doesn't just need one particular department or discipline to answer. You mentioned the planet that we're in now, climate change. We all have different pieces of the puzzle, and we need to put those pieces of the puzzle together in order for us to help this planet survive.
Thank you. I think that's really well said. I think that Stephanie would like to add to that, actually.
So I just wanted to add to the funding for graduates conversation. That was one of the main reasons why I always thought about, you know, is this worth it kind of thing. I thought to myself, you know, I'm staying here and I'm getting paid this very low wage. I have a degree. Why am I here? Like, I felt kind of not valued in a way. I was very fortunate. I was funded through my advisor's NASA grant. But my university doesn't fund master's students. And we had this long discussion of me getting the master's first because, you know, just to sort of dip your toes in it. And I feel like, sometimes I think we are scaring people off into just jumping into PhD. And again, I just think there's this tremendous sense of guilt I still have for staying in school and not making the big money right away.
Yeah, excellent point. So that gets at what you brought up earlier, Stephanie, about the competitiveness that's in the academic realm. That also touches on what Crystal talked about just recently, just before you spoke. And yeah, that science is its own culture. We have to recognize that too. I have a PhD in a geoscience discipline, but I could go to a physics professional society meeting and fit in because I've gone through that academic training. I know kind of the talk, and I know, you know, kind of put words together. Even at a poster session, I wouldn't know anything about the content, but I could move around because there's a culture that is science, and anyone that's outside of that coming in. What's the Rosetta Stone for us when we're talking about other cultures that are coming in, other identity cultures and not professional cultures? You know, what is it that needs to happen in that area? So I was going to start with Stephanie. I think I'm going to come to Joshua on this one to start off. This is a good question about allies. And it says, what do we say to our peers who aren't, here, who aren't on this panel for whatever, not on the panel, but aren't participants, haven't logged in, aren't watching, to make them care about these issues, and what's been effective for onboarding people into DEI efforts, training them as allies, bringing them on?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't think we can forget about the allies that we have that are going to help us with this DEI issue. So, whenever we address, if we're doing DEI workshops, one of the things that I always kind of emphasize to somebody who poses a question like that is to show the data, not only the national data, but also your institutional data. I think having somebody know what your institution is collecting in terms of diversity data is extremely useful. It also helps to make your point a lot stronger. One of the things that I've also found to be highly effective is to include the social scientists into this discussion. We're not social scientists, and so it's hard for us to describe what implicit bias or explicit bias is in specific terms. And so one of the things that I've always done is I've always tried to include either a psychology professor from my campus or from the institution to do a presentation on some of the reasons why we're in the spot we are now in terms of diversity and how people view each other. And so those are some of the more effective things that I've seen done over the years in terms of engaging those people who may not be at a conference or at a workshop.
Isabel, were there any other hands related to that?
No.
No?
So, wait, but you see all the ones in the audience questions.
Yeah. Anyone else want to kind of chime in on that? I know I have some ideas. I see Vernon. I was going to say, I'm going to use Susan's analogy of a garden, and another side of that is to create environments where bad behavior won't be tolerated. And so instead of focusing on trying to get individuals to care, which we should, there's also a part of that of talked about the gatekeepers or people who just don't see that this is important, or why are we talking about this? And all of a sudden, there's a wave of young people that are coming and they care about it. And they are all over the professional societies, and they're writing articles. They're all over social media. As I mentioned, all these identity focused societies. So like it or not, it's coming, and it's coming in a wave. And they're very strategic and thoughtful, and the cohort model is scaled to the nth degree with them. So it's going to happen anyway, from where I sit. But Vernon, what do you want to add to that?
Yes, you put it very eloquently. I just say, you have limited bandwidth, and trying to change other people's values is not effective use of your bandwidth. If there are people who can get on board, then you work with them. But I agree with you. I think that the generation of students coming up now are inspirational to me, having gone through the way I had to go through. And I think they're going to lead the way. And we just need to get enough barriers out of their way, and it's going to be a better day for geosciences and for sciences in general. And yeah, I think you want to put your energy into actionable changes in the system versus changing people's minds.
Thank you for that. We have about, we're down to maybe 5 minutes left, or are we kind of close to go?
No, you have about 13, 14 minutes. Yeah, let's say 13 minutes.
Oh, okay, great. And I apologize in advance to many of the questioners out there. We won't be able to get to all of them, but they're really great. the visibility of, and there's a question and it's kind of a statement now, comparing professional societies or just geoscience as a whole to the UK Royal Institute lectures. And this is about role models or champions at a very high level, well-respected individuals in our fields and disciplines, and the notoriety that we intentionally provide for those types of individuals of color in the geosciences. So they will say the Warren Washingtons of our discipline, or the late Claudia Alexanders of our, or whomever. Is there an opportunity, or how would we elevate those individuals? What needs to be done to make sure that Dr. Crumley gets, after almost a half a decade of running a program that is the primary source of individual Black students or professionals into the oil and gas industry, or even Vernon's program at Howard, which is the primary source of Hispanic and African American atmospheric sciences at the professional level. What do we need to do to be intentional about elevating those successful people and their efforts? I don't want Vernon tonight to answer because I just used them as example. Anyone else? Maybe Rhea, or yeah, how about Rhea and Stephanie? I'll pick on them because since they're the bookends generationally, and this is Rhea's words. I don't want to be accused of any wrong saying or doing, but from a student and someone who's at a mature stage in their career.
Yes. So could you just frame, I'm sorry, I was following and got distracted by your commenting on my blonde hair.
That means I need to go shave some of this stuff off. My framing was, how do we elevate well-known?
Okay, I thank you. That was the part that I missed. Sorry. I think that what we want to do is we really want to show that our profession is rewarding to everyone. And it goes a little bit back to what you asked Crystal about. There are a lot of people who are doing a good job of being a mentor, but they're quiet about it because it's never occurred to them that they needed to speak up and be a role model for the people in the academic world who weren't being good mentors, and to encourage them. They felt that if they did their job well, that was good enough. And I think that if we talk about the people who are the legacy of the profession and what they overcame and how they contributed, and bring in people who are mentoring to bring those people along, it'll do a lot to dissolve some of the negatives that are occurring, because it is true, there is a lot of competition. People don't want to give away too much because they don't want to lose their place, particularly they're on the promotion and tenure track. And there is also a lot of competition for promotions beyond the department level. And I think that if people could just look at everybody as an ally until they prove themselves differently, and sort of encourage them to bring more to the table and be a little more assertive, then things like remembering everyone who contributed would become much easier for them to do. And it would do a lot of good for the profession and make it look more attractive to everyone.
That's an awesome way. Thank you for connecting those dots between allyship and notoriety, I would say. And Stephanie, I want you to chime in here if you would please, because you mentioned the competition in the academy that you weren't really aware of as a student. That was a question that was mentioned. But you also mentioned you needed, and some of the other students, a champion at a higher level
Yeah.
in the institution, you know, someone who has the weight, the authority, you know, and so how do you, what do you think about the necessity for them?
So the question is, how can they, or?
But the original question is, how do we elevate individuals who are well known in the sciences, the individuals of color, so that as the higher champions or higher role models that, you know, would bring awareness to the broader society. But I brought it to your point of having a champion within the institution in that competitive culture that you weren't aware of that the academy
So again, there was a report at a alumni college of mine that was criticizing, hey, we don't have, it was just for Latinx, Latinos, that we don't have any deans. We don't, and I never thought of that. I was like, okay, what, so what, big deal. And, you know, then I start seeing, you know, people organizing and wanting more inclusion. And, you know, sometimes their efforts were challenged by people upper. And, you know, I don't know how to really change that. I think, you know, and another thing is that there's a lot of this diversity, DEI talks. We can see if you're being genuine or not. There's a lot of people who will join or just fill out the broader impacts, but we can tell, you know, if you're being genuine or not. And I feel like it's word of mouth kind of thing between faculty and students. Again, GSA was a really big, I think, you know, these awards like the Doneth Medal and stuff like that, that I think elevates people, or the NSF Career Award, you know, like whenever that happens, the department will shine a light on them and talk about not only their research, but then their outreach and stuff like that. So you know, I don't know if it's good enough. You know, everything can always improve, but from what I've seen, I've been very inspired. For example, there's two paleontologists, both named Dr. Suarez, and I saw them winning an award at GSA, and it inspired me. And I'm like, I'm going to be Suarez et al. One day. So I've seen diverse award winners, but I don't know if that's the case. Like, that's just what I've seen, you know? And also, again, GSA, I feel from the get-go was noticing, you know, hey, we don't have a lot of diverse people coming. Let's organize. It's called Onto the Future. And they sort of hold your hand through the meeting. They'll give you a mentor, and you think to yourself, okay, I'm going, but you know, what if I don't have a poster to present? They always make it worth your while. So again, I think professional societies and government awards like NSF and such, and also just the press office too we work with, it shines a light on people. It's a big broad question, but those are sort of my ideas.
No, thank you. That was perfect. This gets back again to the intentionality of professional societies or departments or institutions. You have to want to do this and be intentional about it, but have actionable goals that you're really going to work to, not the lip service time that's gone by, the box checking time that's gone by, in the social media universe. You're not going to get away with much, and not just talk. People are going to go back and find your footprints wherever and blast them all over the internet. So we have to move forward together, as was mentioned, as Stephanie said, after this wave of Jedi, because everyone all over the world is now talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So when that, you know, when the energy starts to dissipate, who's going to be there? And we'll know, you know, obviously, because you'll stick out on this side or that side. So that's important. So maybe Isabel, I have how many?
Brandon, I think if we take one more question, and there's one from Scott Cameron on the board.
Okay, so one more audience question and then one from Scott. Okay. Yeah. So we'll go to the audience question. Again, there are so many, but what can, I like this one, for instance, as a soon-to-be retiree, what kind of volunteer work can I do with allies to assist people like those on the panel to encourage Jedi success? So what can people do, especially those that are established in their career, maybe thinking about that next phase of their life, and they really want to be involved? What can they do? Anyone? Well, I could jump in and say, Crystal and Rhea, real quick, and then we'll go to Crystal and Rhea. There, in this age of the pandemic, across the country, content is needed for homeschooling, for teachers, and as a scientist, it would be easy to reach out to your local school district right now and say, hey, I can do a 30-minute presentation on the water cycle and how it relates to climate, anything. And I can almost guarantee you that you could be plugged in, because it's all just about virtual and easy to be plugged into that level, maybe middle school, maybe high school, and just start there. And you can even reach out, and because it's virtual, you might be able to reach out. Say you're in Wyoming, you could reach out to a school in Maryland, look them up, and find a district that maybe you're not populated with folks that you're not familiar with, but just be intentional about, I want to provide some quality science content, because there has been a death of expertise over the last 20 years, and in particular in the sciences. So we need to step that up. Crystal.
I definitely think being proactive is the first step for those who are seeking opportunities. Those opportunities will not come to you because no one really knows that you're retiring or that you're available. So being proactive about your involvement is very key and important. I know with the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, there are many retirees who, although they may not be American Indian, Alaska Native, First Nations, Native Hawaiians, etc., but an ally, they really find it a great opportunity to participate in that professional society, because it offers them an opportunity to learn about tribes throughout the United States and Canada, as well as some of the Pacific Islands, the Native Islands, to be able to understand more about those individuals and offer an opportunity for peer mentorship, networking. It's always great to hear about someone who has gone through a path and is now retired, and to learn about what they could do different, or what they would have done different, or maybe see opportunities that they thought they would have had or taken. That in our Native American culture, that's very key for our elders to be able to listen to them about their experiences, because then the experiences that they share are helping us to provide a less challenging path, if you will. And so being able to see those opportunities, and I know there are a number of different professional societies that are representing underrepresented individuals and their professional discipline. So I would say be proactive and seek them out.
Thank you. Rhea, you had the final word for the whole thing, and we're going to turn it over to Isabel after you.
Well, thank you. I would just add to what Crystal said. I have found it rewarding to be a volunteer on boards, and I'm a trustee of my undergraduate alma mater, because then you are really in a very good position to feed back your experience, and what you see might be things that could be supportive going forward. And so look as an alum of where you went to school and going back there and as a retiree and offering help and becoming engaged. I think that's very effective right now as well.
Excellent, thank you.
All right.
Sounds like the take-home message is be intentional and do it. So thank you to the panelists. Isabel, we turn it over to you.
Yes, I couldn't say it better. In fact, I feel like we should end with that. I've been asked to do a short synthesis, but that was a wonderful way to really wrap it up. So I want to say thank you, Brandon. Thank you for being a moderator as well as a keynote speaker. Thank you to our keynote speakers and our wonderful panelists. If you'll permit me, I'd like to just highlight some of the things that I've heard today. It's clear that the sciences continue to be notoriously lacking in diversity. And although it appears that we're witnessing a sea change in efforts and actions for addressing racial and ethnic equity in the geosciences, it's clear that we need more effective strategies for increasing and retaining diversity. And we need the leadership to oversee and provide the vision and the financial and mentoring support to hold these plans accountable. We've heard from several of our speakers and panelists that the STEM workforce cannot operate at full capacity if all available and qualified minds are not engaged. And as Brandon Jones articulated, we need all hands on deck to address the problems our planet is facing. And all hands are not currently on deck. But the focus on diversity so far has been about increasing the numbers with activities and programs to target the goals and that are important goals, but we're following the metrics. And without aligning the needs and expectations of the individual with the program, that's a key thing that's been missing. And without looking at the influence of the gatekeepers. It's clear that everything is much more than the numbers, and numbers that are often defined in a predetermined way. What difference does the level of recruitment matter if the environment is less than supportive or toxic? And you'll recognize these are not my words nor phrases, but wonderfully articulated by our panelists and speakers. What is needed is a culture change. As Brandon articulated, increasing and retaining diversity is not just a business initiative, but a social initiative. We need to integrate social and behavioral scientists to be part of the conversation. And we heard over and over again, there's a pressing need first for critical self-reflection by those already in the system, and in turn, much more creative retention strategies, involving diversity champions with strong commitments to learning about fundamental issues regarding retention and inclusion, issues that arise from the exclusiveness of the geosciences. We need to promote full consideration of the backgrounds and experiences of the person that shape the individuals who we are recruiting, to fully understand the nature of financial and family challenges that many underrepresented persons face, as well as the isolation and discrimination. And as Stephanie brought up, all too often under the radar screen as microaggressions, but which underrepresented persons all too often feel. And as Rhea Graham summarized really well, the focus needs to shift from imposed cultural identity to supportive cultural identity. Again, this requires earnest, critical self-reflection. And we need to appreciate that the geosciences doesn't have a good public relation. There's a confusion as to what geoscience careers involve and the value of that career, especially for the first generation. This is not limited to a lack of awareness of what a geologist does, but also how to become a geoscientist. And we need to invest in the emotional labor required for overcoming the barriers and enacting this real change. And as was said, the barriers are well expressed as trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. I think that was Stephanie who shared that. And as Josh offered, there is no silver bullet, but the fix requires silver buckshot. One size does not fit all. And we heard many opportunities how to enact this change. Regarding building environments of inclusion, for those who built the existing environments, we need to learn, hearing from people of diversity about their stories. Just listen and learn about life experiences and the interface with what drove them to exploring a career in the geosciences. Their stories are often eye-opening and enlighten the path forward for enacting real change. Building environments of inclusion must also assure that such environments do not permit bad behavior. And the young generation in the geosciences are ready and prepared to take this on front and central. And the importance of role models and mentors. Stephanie and Vernon shared their experiences in discovering strong mentors who provide opportunities that would not be available in other ways, and without the geoscience community may not have the benefit of their being members. A way forward may be a community mentoring approach that involves mentors who mirror the identity of a mentee. And underrepresented mentors need to speak up of their past experiences. And the mentor has to be prepared to learn from the students who bring a new perspective to longstanding issues that have been addressed from a far too narrow view. Champions of color at the highest levels are important, as are champions in the administrative ranks of universities. We heard about the success of several programs to provide the funding, the framework, and the nurturing for underrepresented persons, and that have made structural changes in the geosciences. Overcoming the remaining barriers and enacting real change requires dedicated faculty, engaged alums from programs as role models, professional development beyond the technical skills, providing the network and the collaboration of many institutions. And we need to reevaluate how we evaluate geoscientists, in particular in the academy, as these expectations were defined decades ago. So I'll wrap up with a broader message that is crystal clear. Culture change takes time and it takes effort. It does not happen by silence, but with everyone on board, it can be achieved. And without critical self-evaluation and building awareness of the diversity of life experiences that our students and colleagues bring, we cannot succeed. Today, our speakers and panelists have generously provided us with much insight and much to think about. Again, I thank you all for joining us. And before completely concluding, I want to remind everyone that this recording will be available soon on our website. Thank you all. Thank you very much for everything that you've shared.